Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's regular council meeting. Prior to us starting the meeting, stand for the country, the prayer and the service acknowledgement. Acknowledge the
Sorry, am I doing the service acknowledgement or the prayer? For the prayer, thank you. Almighty God, we ask you to bless this council, allow it to be an agent of change. People of this city on direct and prosper its operations, honouring of your.
We gratefully acknowledge the men and women of the Navy, Army and Air Force who made the sacrifice and preservation of Australia's freedom. We also proclaim our gratitude to those who
I'd just like to remind members of the conflict of interest provisions that may impact you during tonight's meeting. There are no apologies or leave of absence from tonight's meeting. But with leave of the meeting, before we go on to anything else, I would like to make an announcement and to provide a gift to somebody. Do I have leave of the meeting? Can you just put up your hands if you're okay with that? Beautiful, thank you very much. As you know, and some of the people in the gallery and those listening at home might know, it's our Councillor Braden Mann's wedding in 2 or 3 weeks. And so the senior staff here tonight and your fellow elected members have got together and have got you a little token of our congratulations and best of luck for your nuptials, which I can give to you now.
Thank you very much, everyone. I was not expecting that. Very, very kind. So sorry I won't be here at the December meeting as well. If all goes to plan, I should be in Port Douglas then. So I apologise and thank you for the gift.
Well, now you tell us. Well, I hope you have a wonderful honeymoon in Port Douglas. We will be thinking of you. And as we said, congratulations. Now we get on to the formal part of the meeting and come back to order with item 4, items adjourned, and there are no items on the table. So we go to the minutes of the previous meeting, and I'll take the recommendation as read. Would somebody like to move that? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you have any questions or any comments relating to the minutes? No. Does anybody wish to speak to the minutes? If not, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 6, we don't have any deputations tonight, but we did receive a deputation request from Mr Young in relation to Seagull Avenue, however, and a petition that he wanted to bring to council. However, the petition was not legally compliant, and he'd also previously spoken on the same matter, so I did refuse his deputation. What we have done is incorporated the petition into the public consultation feedback for the Encounter Bikeway, which is what he was relating to. We don't have any questions from the gallery tonight either. We do have a petition, item 8.1, in relation to the Maud Street Encounter Bay footpath, and the recommendation is that council receives and notes the petition but also that council notes the construction of a footpath, which is what the petition is asking for, on the eastern side of Maud Street, which is included in the asset management plan for the 2022-2023 financial year. So I think it was originally in this year's budget and it's been moved into the following year's budget. They may not be aware of that. So would someone like to move those two recommendations on block, please? Thank you, Councillor Schofield, and seconding that, Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to that? No. Does anybody want to speak to it? Thank you, Councillor Kemp, and then Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. It's more of a question of ensuring that the people who come out of Rosetta Village, will they have a safe refuge crossing, because the footpath will be on the opposite side of the road. For them to access that safely, will you be able to include a refuge safety crossing? Thank you.
They have got a footpath already on the other side of the road. This relates to a footpath on the same side of the road as Rosetta Village.
Yes, I don't think I see what you're saying there, but footpath along the other side of the road by Bay Village does not go all the way through to roundabout. It just goes to dirt. It's not a proper footpath. Down by the Bay Road end, there's a footpath, but it doesn't go all the way through. So
Okay,
I was a bit confused.
ask perhaps Kathy Hayter to respond to that.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Kemp. We can have a look at whether there needs to be some kind of pedestrian refuge there.
Councillor Robertson.
Yes, I had a similar question as to whether this footpath was going to be constructed on the eastern or western side, because I imagine that most of the demand, all the demand comes from the western side, which is people out of the Bay Village. And so I was wondering, is it really going to be constructed on the eastern side of Maud Street, or is it going to be on the western side? Yeah, and the other thing about this one, it's just a query, but I mean, it says here from the eastern side of Maud Street to Inman Valley Road. What Maud Street intersects is the roundabout. Is that actually Inman Valley Road, or is it Mill Road? Anyway, my concern was which side is this footpath going to be constructed on?
Perhaps Kathy, you can answer that again.
Thank you, through the Mayor. I understand it is forecast for the eastern side, but we can have a relook at that. But my understanding is it is the eastern side to join up some existing footpath, but we can have a look and see if that is the most appropriate side.
Thank you, Kathy. Councillor Glasbrook.
I just want to mention that I own a property in Maud Street. I don't see that I have a conflict of interest, but I just want to make sure that people are aware that I do have a property there.
Thank
just
you.
with safety.
So I take that's a perceived conflict of interest. We've got to get these conflict of interest provisions right. You know what happens. So that's perceived conflict of interest.
If that's what you think it is. I don't believe I've got a conflict at all. I just wanted to make people aware that I do have a property there. I can't see, I'm not going to make any, I don't think I have a conflict of interest, but
okay.
I just wanted to mention
it's up to you to decide.
No, I just wanted to mention the fact that I do own a property in Maud Street, but I can't see this has any relevance to me at all.
Are there any further debate or questions in relation to those two recommendations on block? Councillor Schofield, did you want to close debate? No. If there are no further questions, I put that to the floor. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to 9.1, outstanding resolutions, and the recommendation is that Council receive and note the report. Moved by Councillor Hales and seconded by Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to that or have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? If not, I'll put that to those in favour. Those against? That's carried, thank you. The annual financial statements are item 9.2, and the recommendation I'll do on block because the first one is receiving, noting the report, and the second recommendation is that council receive and note the financial statements reporting in an operating deficit. Would someone like to move the two recommendations on block? Thank you, Councillor Hales, and seconded Councillor Henderson. Would either of you like to speak to that or have any questions? Councillor Hales, no. Councillor Henderson, no. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Robertson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The questions I have in relation to the bulk of this deficit that we have on the operating accounts of the due to the Fryway business.
Yes.
But what would have been the deficit if we just take out that extraordinary issue?
I'll ask the CEO to respond to that.
No, sorry, I do have a microphone. There wouldn't have been a deficit because there was a requirement. It's a $3 million contribution, operating contribution this financial year. So there actually would have been a $1 million surplus.
Okay. But there are a few other factors in there as well. The other second question was about the grants, the community infrastructure grants that we got. Is that unusual for us to get grants for operating costs, or were they allowed to be classified that way?
It's not. Yes, it is unusual, and they have to be classified that way, even though we're using them for capital. And these are both of the federal government community infrastructure grants that we received as part of the COVID stimulus. There was a decision made across the local government sector in regards to the standards of how they were applied. Where all other grants, we actually apply them as a capital grant, but these were required to apply them as an operating grant. I add a little bit more to that, but it is unusual, and it did put most councils into a little bit of a spin.
Kelly, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, thank you through the Mayor. So in terms of the decision across all councils to treat them consistently, that was actually done within the auditors group, and the auditors of all the councils got together and decided to have a consistent treatment. The main point that they used in determining that, making that decision, was that there was a high ability, or council had the ability to specify what the monies would be used for. So because it wasn't a set and specific grant fund in terms of you apply for it for a particular project and it's set within the grant funding deed that it has to be used for that, because council had some discretion, they decided that it needed to be treated as an operating grant and recognised at the date of recognition. So we had to change our treatment on that basically at the last minute.
Thank you, Kelly.
Another one, if I might, if no one else is. The asset renewal funding ratio dropped right off this year, and the reasons are given at the top of page 30. That is that there's a staff resource capacity in light of leave requirements. This has come up before, I think, at least in the audit committee of the year before last, that council had over the years accumulated a considerable amount of leave that was backed up and not being used. And I know the administration has been working hard on chopping back that leave liability, I guess you'd call it. How is that going in terms of are we getting back to whatever normal is in those situations? Are we getting back to using up the leave that's been accumulated?
If I may, through the Mayor, I believe while we had a target, and I'm just going off from memory, I think was trying to reduce it by about 1.2 million. We reduced it by just over 800,000. It's not quite hit the target, but it obviously, as you can appreciate, everyone gets another lot of leave. So we actually have better policies and provisions in place in regards to staff must allocate the utilisation of their annual leave within the year in which they receive it. Long service leave is a little bit harder to manage. But yes, we are getting it reduced. But also the asset sustainability ratio, I think probably is the most relevant point. While the specific projects like Railway Precinct was 95% complete as on the ground visually, because of that 5% not complete, the whole item needs to get whipped. So I don't think the asset sustainability ratio is really reflective of what actually got done.
Yes, it's a curious way of treating projects, which makes it very difficult to understand where we stand on projects and how far they are completed.
Because as my explanation at the audit committee, in the perfect world, we should probably hit 130% sustainability ratio this financial year, because we've got to top up what we didn't do last year, because we would have finished the 5% and on top of what we've got to complete this year. But given current restrictions now that we're seeing in regards to contracts, trades and increases in pricing, I can't guarantee that we're going to have 100%, 130% asset sustainability ratio either. I was asked that question at the audit committee. And
the last one was in relation to the asset renewal for this financial year. Do you see any requirement to revisit the budget in relation to those supply shortages and cost increases and so on that are going to will be a ball and chain on the achievement of the targets for that?
It is a very good question. Again, I was asked that at the audit committee, and I really won't be in a position, I would say, until the December budget review, because at that stage, at the time, we had about 18 different tenders out. And once we actually get those tenders in, we know what the pricing is like, we know what the capacity of the construction industry to complete jobs. I'll be in a better position to know and report back to council on where we sit, what we can and can't achieve because of those restrictions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Yes, Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I've got a few questions on the statements. I guess the first one is on the auditor's report. I'm sort of surprised that the auditor didn't actually pick up the Frower auditor report about the implications that the asbestos problem will have on our budget ongoing. And I thought the auditor would have picked that up as a note in there. I know it's in here, but it's not noted by the auditor that it could be a problem. And could we get an explanation from the auditor as to why he did not pick up that issue, which can affect our bottom line over the next year or two?
Kelly? Thank you, through the Mayor. So in regards to our auditors, they did require extra information from us around the Frower liability and the impacts it would have. We were required to put some additional disclosures within our statements from our auditors, and they went through and had a look that there was enough disclosure within the statements to provide people that were looking at them in a number of places where the impact was felt within the statements around that disclosure on why that had changed. So we liaised quite heavily with the auditors in terms of those disclosures to make sure that it was clear and transparent around what had actually happened. But in terms of their particular, the certification from the auditors, they generally wouldn't pick that up for inclusion in the financial statements. It could potentially be a comment that they make within their audit completion report, which is included was included in the audit committee agenda. But they certainly had discussions with us about including disclosures within there.
Thank you, Kelly. It's just a question as to why they didn't note it. Anyone reading this document would expect that when you look at the annual reports that were coming through a little bit later, it certainly is highlighted in the Frower one. On page 69 of the 59, we're talking about total current liabilities. From 2020 to 2021, there's a 2,720,000 variance. And that's great that we've reduced our liabilities down from 10 million down to 7.6. How did we do that?
Through the Mayor, so in terms of reducing the liabilities, a number of factors. So in terms of trade and other payables, generally that is it's a timing issue. So again, it would depend on when the invoices came in at the 30th of June, essentially, and what was outstanding at that point. So it does largely depend on the timing of invoices coming into us. So we had less invoices that came in from suppliers essentially after that 30th of June point. So we had a higher rate of actually cash payments to suppliers before the 30th of June. It is a timing issue with when suppliers and creditors get us their invoices. We also reduced our borrowings as well across the year. So that's a reduction in the liability as well.
Thank you. On page 16 of 59, under note 1, summary of significant accounting policies, it's a statement here by the auditors that standard issues by the AASB not yet effective, which came in. So the question, I suppose, is the new standards that have come in to affect council, how will they affect council, and will they be adopted, or when will they be adopted, the new standards? They haven't been to date, according to the auditor.
Again, through the Mayor, so in terms of those standards that are issued but not yet effective, we would be waiting advice from our auditors in terms of the impact and the accounting treatment that they would like us to undertake. We also have a number of different industry bodies, essentially the Finance Managers Group and the LGA, that would also provide advice to us on that. But principally the direction would come from our auditors when they become effective about what they would be expecting to see. And then we would put into place procedures to enable us to meet those requirements.
As to any timelines as to are they critical or not, or they're just overall just basic standards that are being changed?
Through the Mayor, I haven't looked at them in full because they weren't yet effective. We would generally go through some of those issues with our auditors at the interim audit. And then come up with a plan that they would then approve and say they were happy with for the 30th of June treatment. So we would be looking at that around March in terms of any items there. We can't, having a quick look at them, it doesn't seem to be any issues in terms of us needing to do something straight away. So there would be more items that would change an accounting treatment at the end of financial year.
Thank you. And the last one for this item, note 23, page 52 or 59, it talks about key management personnel with 19 employees classified as key management personnel. But the statement I'm looking to and the question is there was 858,000 variance between 2020 and 2021 where 29 persons were paid a total of a number of compensations. Can you just clarify along what lines that amount of money of 858,000?
So through the Mayor, within that particular note, we have got a statement there saying that the increase in the employees classified as key management personnel in the year was due to a review of the assessment criteria. So the increase is actually because we've increased the number of people we have included that meet the criteria of key management personnel. And that was after having done basically a review of what was included last year and determining that there are more people that actually meet that criteria. And so they've been included in there along with a disclosure to say that we've reviewed it.
Is there any further commentary in relation to that recommendation? Councillor Hales, did you want to close the debate? No, if not, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. And I just realised I didn't write at the very beginning, prior to us starting, welcome Taylor, who is sitting in for Michael Simmons, and it's Taylor's first day at the Times, and he's lucky enough to have us in his first evening. So welcome to Victor Harbour, Taylor. If you have any questions, by all means ask the elected members, and as I said, Michelle, myself and the CEO are available to also talk to you. Let us move now to 9.3, to the annual report, and you will find a page 37 that has been given to you and should be on your desk in front of you. For some reason that was accidentally missed out from the annual report when it was photocopied for you for the agenda. So I will do the recommendation en bloc. As the first recommendation is receiving and noting. The second is adopting the annual report, and the third is entering the annual report in the Australasian Reporting Awards, as we have done the last couple of years, and which I must say has really, I think, contributed to the annual report becoming much better, easier to read, and standard really going up. So well done to the staff for that. Would someone like to move that recommendation en bloc? Councillor Henderson, thank you. And do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Henderson? No. Councillor Robertson? Can you put your microphone on, please?
A couple of queries on the report. I think just in some of the major events here, I don't want to go through them, but I think that there's some that are missing there. So that I'll come back to those maybe outside of the meeting here on that. But yeah, I'll speak to the motion now. I agree with you, Mayor, that the storytelling gets better and better, and of course the document is pretty big, largely taken up by the financial reporting at the end. But it's a good report.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does any, Robertson? Sorry, I'm looking at Councillor Kemp and saying Councillor Robertson, vice versa. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to say? Councillor Kemp, see on you, you must have been coming up.
Thank you. That's the trouble sitting next to Councillor Robinson, I guess. We look alike. I'm in two minds here, but, you know, considering the amount of time we've had to review these documents, it's not just the annual report of the City of Victor Harbor, but it's also the subsidiary reports with their financial statements for the last year. And in the time frame we've had to review them and look at them, it's really hard to do that. And I feel like I need to adjourn this item because to give me more time to read them, to understand them, because when I read on 1.3 of the Fluoride Waste Authority that there's a significant uncertainty in the estimation of the provisions of remediation costs of 9.87 million. This is due to the liabilities of the Farrower with the asbestos stuff. So if the auditors are saying there's significant uncertainty in the estimation, I'm just wondering that we need more time to review this more properly to understand it, exactly what the future will be. So to accept these at the moment as they are, all of them, they're all good reports in the context, but there are some elements in there which I haven't had time to really look through at the financials, and because how will that impact on our council or these subsidiaries in that area. So that's why I'll move the motion to adjourn the report to the December council meeting.
I might ask, sorry, do you want to respond, Victoria?
I guess in terms of the subsidiaries, it's a requirement of council to note the subsidiaries' annual reports. And my understanding, I think most of them have actually already been to council by way of separate reports. At the last meeting, the Farrower one, and again, I'm looking for Kelly because I thought most of them were presented at the last meeting. So they're presented for noting, and then we are required to include them in our annual report. Completely concur in terms of you don't feel you've had enough time with our annual report. It was presented to the Audit Committee last month or earlier in the month, but that's up to you in terms of your prerogative to move an amendment. Council is required to adopt it before the 30th of November, and we need to submit it to members of Parliament within that time as well. But again, your prerogative. The other ones have actually been presented to council.
Thank you for the clarification, CEO, but I suppose, look, I'll withdraw my adjournment motion, but I would hope to take on note that for the next financial year, when we look at the report, we could actually have it sooner, so we could actually have a good review of it and discuss it before it actually comes to chamber, considering the timelines that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Kemp. You have spoken, councillor Robertson, and I'll ask you to close the debate at the end. Your question?
Yeah, so given that to question through the chair to the CEO, so I just have a list here of things that I think some of them are deletions basically that could be included. I want to make it bigger, but and a couple of other things. Is it still time enough to be able to do that for the annual report?
Well, I guess in terms of if they're substantive, then the council needs to agree to them because it's actually coming to the chamber for
Not
adoption.
substantive.
So I would say unless you're significantly changing it, some it may be, and I'm just wondering whether you can give me an example of what you were thinking has been missed, because sometimes you get confused as to what was in this last financial year and the financial previous. Because I've had that same mistake where I'm going, why haven't we included that? And then I realised it was actually undertaken in like May of 2021 and it didn't incorporate the actual financial year.
Yeah, well, just for instance, very quickly, I mean, I know two things here that that we had the 175th anniversary of the Newland Memorial Church in April. I think that's a pretty big deal in terms of a town of this size, and also it's the beginning of local government.
That was last financial year, councillor Robertson, not this financial year.
It may have been, but unfortunately that's not an activity of the council. It was one of our communities. So this is activities that the council has conducted and contributed to. So there would have been many significant events that have happened within our community that aren't in here. But this is an annual report of the City of Victor Harbor as an organisation.
Okay. Yeah.
Unfortunately, not sort of a recollection of all the different great things that have happened in our community that we may not have contributed to or have been the lead in.
Okay. We also had the Live Arts at Newland program, which was in this annual report that was started, and
the partnership
it's not
was
in here.
It was. But again, I'm happy to take on board how it could be incorporated. But again, there's lots of things also that aren't in here, that some of the day-to-day things of other partnerships that we haven't included. So we try to capture as much as we can.
Is there any further commentary on the annual report and on the recommendation on block? Councillor Robertson, did you have anything that you wanted to say wrapping up?
No.
In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We have the September budget review, and the recommendation there is that council receive and note the budget review, and that the second one is that council endorse the budget review, noting net capital expenditure and the operating deficit as you have on your agenda in front of you. I'll take that recommendation on block if someone would like to move it that way. Councillor Kemp.
I was thinking about doing an alternative motion on this one, Mayor Jenkins. I just want to change, the alternative motion would be not to endorse it, because I think there is a lot of issues in here that needs to be discussed before we endorse this to understand the implications of the reporting lines. So I just, again, I'd like to just say the council notes 21-22 September. I know we've already done it in the first recommendation, but I don't think we can endorse it at this stage, I believe, in my personal opinion.
So do you want to change your recommendation to that council not endorse the budget review?
I guess what I'm seeking from the chamber is to only accept recommendation 1, the council receive and note the 21-22 September budget review, because
we can do those two recommendations separately if you would like. If you'd like to move the first one.
I'll move the first one and delete the second one.
Would somebody like to second the first one? Thank you, Councillor Littley. Do either of you want to speak to recommendation 1, that council receive and note the September budget review? Councillor Kemp is the mover.
No, I'll speak to the second one.
Councillor Littley? No. Anybody want to speak to the first one? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The second recommendation, that council endorse, and I suppose, Councillor Kemp, if that doesn't go through, then we're not endorsing it. It's lost.
Yeah, I can see the situation. Look, that's fine. I'll put it to the vote, but I'll be voting against it once it comes up.
Sure. Would someone like to move the second one? Councillor Glasbrook and Councillor Littley.
No, Mayor, I'd like to move that the council receive a note.
We've already just done that one.
No, but this is different. It's noting that there's a capital expenditure and the operating deficit. I think it is still a different motion.
Well, can you tell me what your recommendation is? Because the council just voted that council receive a note the September budget review.
Council receive and note the 2021 September budget review, providing net capital expenditure of $13,661,600 and an operating deficit of $454,200.
Just wait until Kyle has written that down. Okay. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Glasbrook's motion? Councillor Robertson? Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Glasbrook?
I just quickly, I will speak to it. We have had in the past, when we haven't received a noted or endorsed, and it has held up council's proceedings and made some issues. And I remember it coming from the audit committee that council should at a minimum receive a note. And so that's why I've included this. I've been speaking to some of the other elected members if they've got some issues that they want to talk about. I think, that's fine. We can talk about it at a later date, but we've received it, we noted it, and I don't think we're holding the council up. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. When you say that the audit committee just said that you should receive a noted, I do note that the meeting held on the 1st of November on page 38, the audit committee recommended that council endorse the budget review as recommendation, the original recommendation said. So I'm just highlighting that. Councillor Robertson, you wanted to speak? No? Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Look, I do support this change of recommendation, only because I think if we go to endorse it, we're condoning the figures on the line items. And I think there are some figures in here which maybe need to be addressed. And I believe it has been touched on by the CEO with the asset renewal funding, talking about we should be looking at 135%. Not 100%, because that's what is the true figure is. That if we haven't finished some projects and we carry them over, but don't carry the finances over, so we have to rebudget to cover and finish those costs, then the asset renewal has to be at 135% if we're carrying over, or we're not following the asset management plan properly. So either we reflect the asset management plan as a guide as to what we should be doing, and reflected in our financial statements, and that's why I think we should be looking at putting the true figures down if we go to present this as an adopted document. And I guess the other one, the question I have is from the net financial liabilities ratio from in 2021, 42% last year up to 71% in a quarter. How come we jumped so dramatically in a quarter, 30-odd% in our net financially liability ratio?
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. I might just ask Kelly Knight-Stacey to respond, especially to your, you said we should have the true figures down. Perhaps Kelly can respond to that.
Thank you, through the Mayor. So in terms of the September budget review, this budget review is as at the end of September and based on the information that we had planned at that point in time. As Victoria mentioned, we do need to have a very comprehensive look at the capital budget and look at the asset renewal funding ratio in the December budget review once we've had a number of the tenders and significant quotes come in. We don't have that information at this point in time, and the September budget review is based on the data we have at that point and what it looks like. The end of financial year will look like with that data. We will be doing that further comprehensive review. The December budget review has actually opened for staff to start populating and investigating, and that will come to council in February. But until we have gone through that comprehensive review and have some of those tenders and figures come through, we won't be able to provide anything more accurate than we have here. These are the accurate figures based on the 30th of September position, noting that we do want to do more work in that space, and we've foreshadowed that. In regards to the net financial liabilities ratio, it's sitting at the 70% because council took out a loan for $5 million through council resolution, I think at the September council meeting, I think it was. So that's what's increased our net financial liabilities ratio is that loan.
Two subsequent questions, please. Kelly, my understanding is that if we 35% down at the end of the last financial year in the net asset renewable funding ratio, then that is carried over because we got to do those works, aren't we? So why isn't it reflected in this document? Because we set the target of 100% at the beginning of the financial year. We're carrying over 35% if your mathematics says you add them together, because that's what we're trying to achieve this year, 135%, because we're doing catch up from last year. So to me, the figures are not correct, but that's just my opinion. And so I think that's why, you know, we need to be careful. The $5 million you said we bought. Oh, sorry.
Just ask Kelly to answer that. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you through the Mayor. So in terms of the figures, they are correct based on what we know at this point in time. If we're talking, before you were talking net liabilities ratio, so that's around our borrowings. If we're talking asset renewal funding ratio, that is around the construction and the required construction or capital works required by our asset management plans. The part of the review that we will do in December, once we know what the tenders and quotes come in like, will be around capacity, in both in terms of dollars as well as supplier availability, contractor availability and staffing. So we will be able to formulate a better, a different calculation based on more knowledge than we will have at that time. At this point in time, until we know whether we've got contractors and suppliers that can supply us the goods within the budget, these are the accurate figures that we have at hand.
Thank you very much for the explanation. On the $5 million, I thought the $5 million we borrowed were to cover an existing loans, which already added to $5 million. All we were doing is consolidating them into one loan from a number of loans. So it's already there. I don't see how it increased our financial liabilities.
So through the Mayor, the original budget had that built into it. And so we were showing that we were going to sit around the 70% taking out that loan. We had increased the use of our CADs over the first couple of months within the financial year. And yes, we were paying down those CADs, but we still have some of them that are being utilised at the moment and will be utilised going forward for the significant capital works that we've got. So we're saying that by the time we get through all the construction for this financial year, including drawing down on more CADs, as well as the new fixed term loan at the 30th of June next year, we're looking at having a 71% net financial liabilities ratio. So this is a future dated forecast for what we think it's going to look like at the end of June next year.
Thank you. And then the last question, please, on operating surplus ratio, the minus 1.5%, is that including the FRAWA liability that we're carrying for that from last year?
So through the Mayor, no, it doesn't, not in terms of that liability that was raised at the 30th of June. It will include potentially, once we know when and how how FRAWA are taking out their loans to cover those actual costs. It may need to, it will include at a later date interest or extra contributions that council will need to make to FRAWA, actual cash contributions to help them service their loan. But it doesn't include the liability for the actual recognition of the asbestos remediation works.
Okay, so it's 3.5 million, what we're up for, 35%. So at this stage, we haven't done any planning on how we would pay that out over the next 1, 2, 3 years, which may affect this surplus ratio.
So through the Mayor, FRAWA are looking at taking out a long-term loan, I think potentially over 10 years, for them to service that. Council would be then required to provide a contribution through our normal contributions to help them meet the requirements of that loan. So based on our, which now 30% equity share, because it did change during with a year swap over, we would be required to provide essentially 30% of their interest repayments and potentially their principal repayments depending on their cash flow.
And thank you again. And my final question, considering the fact that the FRAWA auditors believe that they've underestimated the impact of this, what provisions will we make? What provisions will we make to cover any additional costs that may come along in forecasting to ensure that we're not going to be caught out again over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years?
So through the Mayor, we will be including some data in the next review of our long-term financial plan once we have all the information from FRAWA. In terms of any change in the remediation costs, it's unknown at the moment, so we will have to deal with that once we have the information. However, Council recognised a 35% share of that liability based on what was in place at the 30th of June. It's now 30%, so there's a 5% variance or essentially a buffer there for Council in terms of what that ending liability and position may look like. So Council does have a small risk minimisation buffer there that may help us, but it will definitely be included in the next lot of longer term planning.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I'm not going to be supporting this one. Getting a lot of deja vu from 2018 when we tried to, I guess, go back in time and change history and then try and endorse that. So I think we learned that we can't do it then. 3 years later, we still can't do it. So I'm not going to be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Is there any further commentary? Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'm going to start off with some questions around the nature of the 2 motions, the one we just did and the one on for us right now. And the question would be, what does this motion do that the last motion doesn't, other than note specifically the 2 dollar figures? In terms of operationally, as a result of this motion versus the last motion, is there any difference to the way that staff would undertake what comes
Through the
after
Mayor,
this?
Kelly obviously wants to speak as well. One is noting the report, obviously that you're receiving the report, which you've done. The administration was seeking you to endorse the changes to the capital and the operating expenditure. If you're noting them, it is just a review, but preference would be that you endorse them because obviously these are changes to your budget.
I guess, yeah, the question is around the changes that Councillor Glasbrook made to the original recommendation to change this part 2 to receive a note as well, because we did receive a note, the budget review in that first recommendation. This is only receiving and noting the budget review again, but with the addition of 2 budget figures. So I don't see that this motion does anything that the previous motion doesn't, where the original motion does go a step further and say Council endorses this figure. If we're just receiving and noting the budget review again with the figures there, it's exactly the same as the last motion because we already received and noted the budget review, which is everything inside the report, including those budget figures. Is that correct?
Through the Mayor, you're correct. The first recommendation actually is missing the word report, which would normally be on the end of the very first recommendation. So in terms of what's up on the screen, all this second recommendation does is actually adding clarity around what you're receiving and noting.
But operationally, as a result of the first motion versus the second motion, there is no difference.
There is no difference operationally in terms of budget lines or activities that need to or were planned to be undertaken or to go ahead. Council administration won't be able to deliver on those unless there is an operational safety or otherwise WHS requirement that the CEO can exercise her delegation to go ahead with. So a number of the items within here may need to be put on hold until we can bring it back to council.
So just final question and related to that. This motion currently before us changes nothing compared to the motion before. The original recommendation for part 2 does have an operational change attached to it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just make sure
Sorry.
that the members understand that conversation? So you're clear on that?
It's
Yep.
pretty thorough.
Sorry, Councillor Hales.
All good. From the result of those questions, I also can't support this motion. It's just duplicating work we've already done in the previous motion and has no operational impact, so therefore is, in my opinion, a waste of time. I would support the original part 2 because it does provide something for the organisation and move us forward, but what this motion achieves is nothing new compared to the motion before it. So therefore it's a waste of the Chamber's time. And yeah, as Councillor Mann highlighted, we're stepping back into 2018 again where we're trying to change our homework after it's already been marked. I think, yeah, the budget review is a review of what has happened, and yeah, it's what has happened. So I would support, or I would happily move the original part 2, but I'll be voting against this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Kelly, just to make sure that I understand, the council has, in order for you to do anything operationally, this budget review has to be endorsed by council. Is that correct?
Yes, essentially that is correct, unless it has an operational necessity that the CEO has the ability to override. But there's a number of items within here that would need to be put on hold until we could bring it back to council.
Okay, thank you. So for clarity for the chamber, if this motion is, if this recommendation is lost, we'll then move to recommendation 3, which is the original recommendation 2. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Glasbrook, would you like to close the debate?
Yeah, I'm curious as to the Manager of Finance's statements. I clearly recall coming from the Audit Committee that council at a minimum was to receive a note and that there would be no ramifications of that, but I'll have to clarify that because I'm not 100% sure, unfortunately, but that's certainly how I recall the situation that occurred earlier on, but that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. That closes the debate. I'll now put recommendation 2, that council receive and note the September budget review to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That motion is lost. I'll now put the motion that council endorse the 21-22 September budget review, providing the net capital expenditure, the operating deficit as read. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconded by Councillor Schofield. Councillor Henderson, that? No, does anybody want to speak to that? No, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor Jenkins, I'd like to move another motion if I could, please.
Certainly.
It's just simply that the December budget review be presented at an informal gathering before being presented to the February council meeting. I presume that would be presented at the February council meeting in the earlier discussion.
Just wait.
Yeah, I haven't got it written down, sorry, we got it. So just
You happy with that, councillor Glasbrook?
Yes, thank you.
Would you like to speak to that?
Really, I just want that to happen so that we get the opportunity to spend a little bit of time on it rather than it being presented straight to council where we don't really have an opportunity to discuss things, as there will be some issues with FRARA, and there could well be other issues by then with, you know, grants, whether we can fulfil the we've been endeavouring to do. So it's just really to keep us up to date, and opportunity to discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Thank you, councillor Kemp. Do you want to speak to that, councillor Kemp?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I do support this. I think when we're dealing with reviews every quarter, it does raise a lot of issues, and take on board councillor Hale's comments that we shouldn't be wasting time in the chamber. So if we do have these informal gatherings where we can break down and discuss these types of items, then really we should come to chamber and go through quite quickly with any changes that may be done through the informal gathering process for clarification. So I do support this for those reasons.
Thank you, councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Hales?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I will also be supporting this motion, as Councillor Kemp wisely highlighted. This is a good motion because it provides elected members the opportunity to discuss with staff and administration what is in our budget reviews. I guess what we saw in the second motion put in this bracket this evening was the result of elected members wanting to achieve something, but not necessarily having had those discussions with administration about how to actually go about achieving it in a productive manner. And so therefore, it did waste time, potentially. So this would set us up for a better win in the future, save us some time by having those discussions beforehand with administration and with each other around these issues, and therefore mean the business of the chamber is a bit more smooth and achieves more.
Thank you, councillor Hales. And I think noting what you've said, I think the more information that we can have as elected members when we come to the chamber nights like this, the quicker we can get through without having to ask questions on the spot. Does anybody else have any comments that they'd like to make or questions that they have? Councillor Glasbrook, would you like to close the debate? No. All right, I'll put this to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to item 9.5, which is the council rate rebate application, the Adelaide Benevolence Society. And I will once again do that recommendation en bloc, receiving a no recommendation and council denying the application. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, councillor Robertson. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, councillor Littley. Councillor Robertson, do you want to speak to that? No. Councillor Littley? No. Does anybody want to speak to that? I'll put that to the floor then. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. 9.6, update to fees and charges. And the recommendation is as read, endorsing those three updates to the fees and charges register. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, councillor Schofield. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, councillor Hales. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that or have any questions? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a question along the lines of, if we're going to remove the $50 refundable deposit, are we still charging our ratepayers $50 for a cat trap?
My understanding, councillor Kemp, is no, we're not, but I can double check that with Kathy Hayter or Graham. Graham? It's a bond. Yeah, so they didn't pay. My understanding is that they didn't pay for it. They've never paid for cat traps. So this was a bond that we're just removing the bond. Yep, thank you. Any further questions, councillor Robertson?
Yes, Mayor, First item there, just a question about the $60 fee. My understanding was that this new GWIS planning service is that you're able to go and do those searches online. Is this a charge that comes in when someone doesn't want to do their own searches and comes to the council and asks them to do the search for it? That's what the $60 is for?
Yeah, through the mayor, it could be a one or the other. So it could be through the system for plans that are in the system already. But there's many years of worth of plans that predate the system. So that's a charge to for council to retrieve the files and find plans.
And just a follow-up question for that. Is that the true cost to council of providing that service?
Again, through the mayor, swings and roundabouts, really. Some are quick to find, some aren't so quick to find. It's not always easy to know which ones will be easy to find and which ones won't be. I guess the commentary says that it better reflects the costs. You know, a lot of time and motion study would have to be done, I guess, on all of those individuals to see.
I just wondered if it, in your experience, whether it would be on average a recovery of council's staff time to do that.
I think through the mayor that yes, which is why we've suggested it be $60.
Is there any further commentary from members? Councillor Schofield, is there anything that you want to say? In that case, I'll put that to the floor. And those against? That's carried, thank you. We need to look at 9.7, the review Treasury Management Policy, Procurement Policy and Prudential Management Policy. And once again, this has been through the Audit Committee and discussed at the Audit Committee. The two recommendations, first one, Council receiving and noting the review Treasury Management Policy, Procurement Policy and Prudential Management Policy report. And that the second recommendation is Council adopting the reports as provided in the attachments. Would someone like to move that way?
I'd like to discuss them separately, please.
Separately, certainly. The first recommendation is receiving and noting. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Councillor Hales, and seconding that. Is that your hand up, Councillor Robertson? Yep, and seconding that, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to receiving and noting the report? No. Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? All those in favour? That's carried, thank you. The second recommendation is that Council adopt the three policies as provided at attachment A, B and D. Want to move that way, Councillor Kemp?
I'd like to move an alternative motion, Mayor Jenkins.
And that is?
The Council adopt the Treasury Management Policy, the Prudential Management Policy as provided in attachment A and B, and the Procurement Policy as provided at attachment D, with the following changes in the authorisation consultation column, that the following statement to be deleted: within approved budget of CEO, all other, in attachment A of the policy.
While that's being written up, I'll just give members time to go to that part of the policy, which is 7. And it's on page 103 of your agenda. And can you just propose can you repeat those changes, Councillor Kemp?
Okay, I'll read it out again. That Council adopt the Treasury Management Policy, the Prudential Management Policy as provided in attachment A and B, And the procurement policy has provided attachment D with the following changes in the authorisation consultation column, that the following statement to be deleted within approved budget, CEO, all other, in attachment A of the policy.
Can everybody see where that is in the policy on page 103?
It's the
So
right-hand
it's
column.
It's the right-hand column that says authorisation consultation, and it's the last,
Yeah.
the last box.
It's a reference to the value of 150,000 and above expenditure.
So it needs to be read in context with the boxes on either side. Yep. I'll just ask the CEO to explain that.
Yep.
As my understanding is that Councillor Kemp is wanting anything above $150,000 that is approved by council. Come back to council for approval, and I don't have a delegation anymore.
Yes, that's correct. I could have my motion, but basically that's the outcome by removing those statements.
So are you saying that by removing that statement, you want the CO to have delegation? No,
No,
you don't
no.
want the CO to have delegation. Okay. So are you happy as it reads on the board?
Bit hard to read from here, but
That council adopt the Treasury Management Policy and
Yep.
Prudential Management Policy as provided attachment B, and the Procurement Policy as provided attachment D. The following changes in the authorisation consultation column, that the following statement be deleted within approved budget, CEO, all other, in attachment A of the policy.
yes, that's correct.
Do all the elected members understand the recommendation that Councillor Kemp is making? Now, do I have a seconder for Councillor Kemp's recommendation? Councillor Robertson. Councillor Kemp, do you want to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. There's an old saying that approval of budget is not automatically approval of expenditure when you're dealing in corporate world sometimes. But the role of our members under Section 59 of the Act is to keep the council's resources, allocation, expenditure and activities and the efficiency and effectiveness of its service delivery under review. I believe by making these changes to the procurement policy will make us adhere to those statements. Part of the reason I'm doing this is because under the CEO's performance, you know, again, in the annual plan, the 25 key planned activities were only 60% were completed. The CEO's KPI is to deliver the annual plan with budgets, and of course, naturally, that can put the CEO's performance under review if these activities or we're under utilising and not completing everything we have to do. So I think we're looking about capacity, capability of our council to deliver its services to the community. And with the changing and emerging issues that are coming and facing council now, and the FRAO is just an example of that, I think sometimes instead of sitting down and moving motions to have a complete review or the budget reviews at December and that, we could actually end up making decisions at the time and more timely about whether we continue to spend money on certain projects or not. And I think that's where we need to be more responsible and more accountable. So the Chamber does approve ambitious annual plans and budgets, and expecting the CEO to carry them out may be exceeding the capacity, as I said, capability of the council to deliver. By having an annual plan and budget for direction, but projects which are above 150,000 Ks needs approval from the Chamber, because that's our role as a governing body, to actually take that responsibility and accountability of that. Our community would expect us to make those accountabilities, because that's what our role is. Yes, we can delegate, but also we're delegating some of that responsibility and accountability, which I think is unfair to put on top of the CEO's, because the elected members, the community elected us to carry this type of work, not the CEO. With the changing environment and emerging issues that impact on council to deliver projects may be handled better by the chamber at the time when changes to the delivery of the annual plan and budget and that present for approval depending on the environment at the time. So things do change. We need to be looking at that. So I think from that perspective, I just feel that we need to ensure that when we make decisions about major expenditure, that it is the right time to do it, even though we have a plan for it. Plans are not set in concrete. Can be changed, and I think this is an opportunity for our council to be, the chamber that is, the elected members, to take more responsibility and accountability of its role. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson, did you want to speak to the motion? Councillor Littley, and then Councillor Schofield.
Might not come as a surprise that I won't be supporting this, and I understood from the outset what it was intending to do. However clumsily and sneaky as it might seem it was being put. We have a CEO performance review. I have absolute confidence in the CEO's capacity to manage these situations and this work, and yeah, I won't be supporting it, and I'd really hope that my fellow councillors won't support it either. And that absolute confidence, I'll just reiterate that in the CEO.
Councillor Schofield.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly with my fellow elected members. I think it's a bit of an insult that's just been put forward to our CEO. And I think my fellow elected member should be offering both the chamber and the CEO an apology.
Councillor Henderson.
I won't be supporting this motion either. I believe the delegations has been well reviewed and well considered over a long period of time, and I don't see why we should be jumping and suddenly changing delegations in this particular motion.
Thank you. Do I have anybody else who would like to speak to this? Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'm going to start with a question. Surprise. My first question, I'm not sure that there would be an answer for this one on such short notice, but just to provide some context, how many procurements would fall under this bracket of the policy in a given year?
Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to give you an exact number, but there are many. Obviously, council has a number of policies and procedures in place as to how we do procure. I just think this would actually hold up business of council significantly. You appoint me to have the judgment and ability to work within council's policies and procedures, budgets, annual business plans, etc. Most items actually do come back to the chamber. You have consideration of them. So I just think it would actually significantly delay programs, projects of this council. Obviously, anything that is beyond budgeted capacity of the council as allocated by the council does come back to the chamber for a decision, because I only work within the budgets that are allocated to me by the council.
Thank you. I guess your response kind of reinforces my thinking around the nature of these changes, because I similarly believe that I think there's some pretty good procedures in place for us to monitor and provide that oversight of council's spending. Things like quarterly budget reviews, things like annual reports, both of which we've handled this evening, not to mention the setting of the annual business plan and budget itself. We set out at the start of the year, we say what we'd like to spend on what projects, and we see most of those big procurements come back to us in the chamber. However, I feel providing all spending over $150,001 for it to come back to only 12 times a year seems very constrictive on our organisation, seems to me would be a massive inefficiency of our resources. A council meeting isn't the most efficient use of everyone's time, and having more of them certainly wouldn't be a good result for our organisation, because it means that the staff are spending more time listening to us talk and less time actually delivering on our plans for our community. I think that this move to change this particular piece within the attachment expresses a will for council to be able to micromanage the spending of our organisation. And it's my belief, and I would say the majority of the community I engage with would also agree that council's here to provide oversight. We're not here to run each budget line of this organisation. Because yes, we are elected, but that's why we set the budgets. That's why we have our say over the annual report, the budget reviews. We do provide that oversight of the spending of the organisation. We also are the ones who initially set out and go, let's spend this on this, and it comes back to us if it sits outside of that. We're here to think strategically. We're here to set the vision for our community, while also undertaking those sound financial principles, but also acknowledging that we're 9 community representatives from very different backgrounds. We're not accountants, all 9 of us. In fact, I dare say 0 of us are accountants professionally. And therefore, we hire very intelligent and well-qualified staff to be doing these activities on behalf of our community. And so I think that we should be backing them in to deliver on our plans that we have put together based on what we hear from engaging with our community.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Is there any further debate or questions in relation to the recommendation? No. Councillor Kemp, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I understand Carol Schofield's concerns by wanting me to apologise. I thought comments about the CEO was about trying to protect her. So, we're not setting her up as a chamber because we are responsible and we are accountable according to the Act for financials. And I think it's not taking away anything. The original, when we first came into this chamber, you know, that's when the procurement policy was changed from the original, where the chamber did sit on $150,000 above decisions because that's what we do. That's the decision-making process. But it's interesting because when I, in a past employment, give you an analogy that a chief officer executive at the time, you know, with a $150 million budget, 1,000 employees, only had expenditure delegation of $1 million. Anything above that had to go back to the minister. So here we are giving our CEO carte blanche to spend 4 million or 5 million, depending on what the annual plan states and what the budget says. So it's sort of out of context with what happens within governments of different levels. But saying that, again, it was about bringing accountability back to the chamber to make the right decisions on issues which may have to change or in that respect. So that's the reason why I brought it to the chamber, because I thought it worked previously all right, and why should it not work again? So, and also I thought I was trying to protect the CEO from being taken under, the term I'm trying to find is under scrutiny about performance. So that's what I was trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. I'll now put that to the chamber. All those in favour? And those against? That recommendation is lost.
Audit division, please.
Yes, certainly. All those in favour? Councillor Glasbrook? I'll just wait. Oh, sorry, just wait for Kyla to. Councillor Kemp and Councillor Robertson. And against is Councillor Mann. Councillor Hales. Councillor Littley. Councillor Henderson and Councillor Schofield. I think motion lost, and I think that the CEO does a fabulous job. We don't give her carte blanche to spend millions. We have a budget which the staff stick to, and if there needs to be anything over the budget or any variations that come back to council for us all to debate, we have a number of ways that we have oversight. Councillor Hales pointed out a number of them, and we also have the Audit Committee as well, which provides recommendations to us and to the council. And as chair of the CEO Performance Review Board, I'm very happy with the way that her performance, that she has been performing, staff have been performing. They've been very fiscally conservative and doing very well. So we need to go back to recommendation 2, and that is that council adopt the Treasury Management Policy, Procurement Policy and Prudential Management Policy as provided at attachment A, B and D. Moving that way, Councillor Hales, and seconding that, Councillor Schofield. Councillor Hales, would you like to speak to that? No. Councillor Schofield? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, I have 2 questions on this. On page 75, in the definition of local supplier, and this goes directly to the business of local procurement. It says here that a supplier of goods or services who conducts their business from the Victor Harbour area. Seems a bit loose to me. Should it be Victor Harbour postcode, or should it be the district that we live in, or is it more than that? What does the procurement take it to that to mean at present?
I know that the chamber has made it really clear to the CEO and to the staff they want as much procurement to come from the Victor Harbour area as possible, being the Victor Harbour Council area and the surrounds of the area, so that we can provide jobs to the people who are living in Victor Harbour. I can let the CEO let you know precisely what is meant by area, but I would presume that it's the Victor Harbour Council area and the South Coast.
Councillor Robertson, just to draw your attention, you're actually referring to the old policy. The amended policy, we've actually altered that. So local supplier on page 89, it says means a supplier or business who has its principal business within the Southern Fleurieu Peninsula. So we have broadened that rather than it is just to be located in Victor Harbour. Obviously, we are trying to encourage and support local businesses right across the South Coast. So
okay. Yep. Sorry. Yep. Point taken. My second question was in relation to the, since we're doing such a large review of the of these procurement policies, I know that in there it says on page 88, I think, that the down the bottom it says that the policy does not cover unsolicited proposals. Therefore, I guess that means the unsolicited proposals policy. Should we be including the unsolicited proposals policy in this procurement process, since it
through the Mayor, that would defeat the whole purpose of being unsolicited. So we utilise this policy when we're actually procuring. We're going out to procure. If something is unsolicited, then we are unprepared for it to come. Hence, we have a policy.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Is there any further discussion or debate on that recommendation? Councillor Hales, did you have anything you wanted to close the debate with? Yes, I'll put it to the floor. Favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We now move to 9.8, which is related to the mobile food vendors permit policy, the mobile food vendors permit guidelines and location and mobile food vendors application form. Those 2 recommendations on block, unless anybody objects. The first one is receiving and noting the policy, guidelines and application form report, and the second one is adopting the policy, permit guidelines and noting the amendments on the application form. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson. And seconded that. Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to those two recommendations? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is an important policy in that probably what this council area needs, what this city needs, is more mobile food vendors than what we have at present. We've always been very, perhaps overly cognizant of the existing food vendors to the detriment of to the attraction of our place, I believe. We need to be having more vendors, a greater diversity of them. And particularly, I think it's a great way of encouraging local youth into the hospitality industry. But what we're emphasising here is the need to, to restrict further the food vendors in terms of where we allow them to be and what they have to do. And there's still a significant process to go through in terms of setting them up. I come back to also the Australian Livability Census, which has just recently been done, where the major demand of people in voting on what would the place that you'd like to live in look like. It would be green, it would be well connected, it would be well interconnected, and also it had opportunities for engaging, buying food and hospitality services that were not in a mall or in a central area. And I don't know that this does that. We have only a few locations in Victor at present suitable or said to be suitable for mobile food vendors to operate from. No one operates from them. Because places, but we've got them down on our list. And also some of them, like say the Barker Reserve site here on page 128, that the only time that one will be allowed to be used will be Monday to Friday, 4 p.m. to sunset. Well, if that became a serious place for people to come and charge their electric vehicles, I think they'd like to see something else that was over there, except, 4 p.m. to sunset Monday to Friday. So, to me, I appreciate what's going on, the work that's gone into reforming these regulations, but I see us come back again, page 109. What we've gone from being environmentally friendly to be community development type city, our aspirations now are to be financially sustainable and well governed. And also I found in going through the policy here, there's huge areas of it, that are some in red ink and some in blue. It's mostly all crossed out. I had a real struggle reading it as to what it was supposed to be. But to me, if our mobile food vendor arrangements are all that's on page 116, then we're not giving our youth and we're not giving our economy much of a chance to really blossom with mobile food vendors.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else have anything to say or that they'd like to add? No, I will put that to the vote. That's on block. And all those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you.
I vote division, please, Mayor.
Decision. Favour, please. Braden Mann. Councillor Nick Hales. Councillor Brian Littley, Councillor Tim Glasbrook, Councillor Marilyn Henderson, and Councillor Carol Schofield. And against, Councillor Kemp and Councillor Robertson. That motion is carried. Thank you. We now move to 9.9, Code of Practice for Access to Meetings and Documents. The recommendation, the first one is to receive and note the reviewed Code of Practice report, and one is to Council adopt the Code of Practice for Access to Meetings and Documents as provided in Attachment A. Happy to do those en bloc unless anybody objects. Somebody would like to move them en bloc. Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield, no? Speak to it. Okay, so I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Item 9.10, the Statute Amendments Local Government Review Act. For feedback, the draft 2 regulations. First recommendation is receiving and noting the draft round 2 regulations report. And the second part of that, the second recommendation is submitting feedback in relation to aspects of that report. If you're happy to move that en bloc, we can do that. If someone that way, happy to move that way, Councillor Robertson. Yeah. And seconding Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want those 2 recommendations? Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, it's a question really to the second item. As to the CEO, basically, I think, if not to Director Padhouse. But anyway, appreciate the work that's done in terms of providing these feedbacks to Adelaide. And the work that goes into it. And we've done some excellent feedback during this year as well. I just wanted to get a feel from you as to, are we kicking any goals with our feedback? Are we being taken note of? Are we getting anything changed in terms of getting taken notice of?
Through the Mayor, I'd say that we are, well, I'd say kicking goals. Yes, we are, because we're actually very lucky. We've got a number of staff that sit on various representative groups. So it's not much of getting things changed. We're getting things included into, or maybe timeframes considered in regards to the practicalities of how some of these changes are to be implemented. So that's why I think it's important that we do provide that feedback. So a number of staff have been quite instrumental in giving that feedback to various things. So Kelly sits on the finance group, Kyla sits on the governance group, and through those groups we do give specific feedback.
I just note that elected members were provided the opportunity to give feedback in relation to this back in October, but no feedback's been received. So really the recommendation looks at council submitting a formal submission, but delegation to do so on our behalf. Is there anybody that wants to talk to the 2 recommendations? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Audit Committee, the independent member report. There's 3 recommendations there. I'm happy to do them en bloc, and you want them done separately, Councillor Robertson? No, en bloc? So Councillor Robertson on block. Do I have a seconder for those 3 recommendations on block? Councillor Littley? Do either of you want to speak to them? Does anybody want to speak to them? Those in favour? Against? Carried, thank you. We now have 9.12, the Australian Coastal Council Association call for nominations. Councillor Henderson?
Mayor Jenkins, I'd like to declare a perceived conflict of interest because I'm the nominee on this item, but I will stay in the chamber and I will take part in the discussion if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Are you going to vote as well? You will? Thank you. In relation to this as well, once we actually will do that recommendation, and then I'll go on to the next point in relation to that. So the first recommendation is receiving and noting the report, and the second recommendation is supporting Councillor Henderson's nomination. Are you happy to do that on block, or would you like to do it separately? On block? Would someone like to move that way? On block, move the recommendation on block. Councillor Littley? And Councillor Mann seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to the 2 recommendations? Councillor Littley?
I'll just say that I anticipate that we might have some commentary here from the chamber with regards to the importance and value of the Australian Coastal Council Association Committee and our representation on it. I think as recent as the past 2 weeks, we've been shown how important it is to have representation in this space. So I encourage the support for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Kemp?
Just a question of clarification. If Councillor Henderson is successful, and I believe she will be, because I will support her, does Councillor Henderson receive anything for being on this National Council Committee in way of accommodation, meals or anything like that, monetary gains?
There's no stipend associated with this, but like with all of us councillors, if we are doing something on behalf of council, then accommodation is paid for. I'm not sure whether the coastal councils would have paid for that accommodation or whether it would come from this council. I'll check that with the CEO.
Through the Mayor, prior to COVID, my understanding is that the coastal council meetings were held in various locations, and I think it was only just the travel that was provided by the Coastal Council Association. If, for example, council's nominee or representative is to attend a congress or conference and it wasn't supported by the Australian Coastal Councils, it would need to come to council for prior approval, as it has done in the past also. Unfortunately, the last 2 years, it's all via Zoom.
Are there any further questions or any further commentary? Councillor Glasbrook?
Yeah, sorry, just a question on the process we're going through. This document that we got on the table, that's related. It says there are about 2 candidates.
Yeah, we'll talk about that doc. There's only one candidate from this council that is nominating. Once we're finished with that, we'll talk about the second document. I don't want to confuse.
So just to explain a little bit further, the reason you've got that, this is coming retrospective to the chamber because they closed nominations prior to our council meeting. We sought approval from the Australian Coastal Council stating that we were bringing it to this meeting on this date. They said nominations had closed, so we submitted it. They said if we didn't seek council's approval, then Councillor Henderson's nomination would be removed from that ballot paper. If you support it, then we need to actually complete the ballot paper because there are already 2 other nominations and you need to pick 2 from that form. So it is a retrospective. We do explain that in the report.
Okay, so we'll just stick at the moment with the 2 recommendations on 9.12. And we have a mover and a seconder. Does anybody else want to speak? Councillor Littley, you didn't need to speak before. Do you want to wrap anything up? No. In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now, as Victoria just said, this is being done retrospectively, and you have a form which you have been given in relation to the South Australian representatives. So we don't need to vote on that tonight. Are we going to?
So just through the Mayor, we'll put up a recommendation. Obviously, we're assuming that council will vote. You need to vote for two of the candidates. We assume that obviously you would support Councillor Henderson, and you need to pick one of the other two candidates. Hence, we've given you their profiles in that attached information. So there are two that council gets to vote for as a member of the Australian Coastal Councils.
Should we do that? Yeah, I think. So we've got Marilyn Henderson, Bill Jameson from the City of Onkaparinga, and Keith Parks from Alexandrina Council. I'm happy to do this as a secret ballot, which is what we normally do when we're voting for something. However, if there's a unanimous vote for two particular people as well, take advice from Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jane. I would float the idea that we support Councillor Henderson along with Mayor Parks for these positions on the Australian Coastal Council's Committee of Management. I think time there, and so has Mayor Parks, who has been there for many years now, and both represent this national body. And so that's how I would happily move that motion if fellow elected members.
All right, do I have a seconder for that motion? We can take that as a motion. Thank you, Councillor Mann. Do you want to speak to that at all? I'll take what you said as you speaking to it, Councillor Hales. Does anybody want to speak to that motion or have an alternative motion that they might want to put up if this fails? No, in that case, I'll put that motion that council vote for Marilyn Henderson and Keith Parks to sit on be the South Australian representatives on the Australian Coastal Councils Association. Those in favour? All those against? That's a unanimous decision. Thank you. And can I have that noted as a unanimous? Please, Kyla. We now move to Community and Development, a request for funding support from the Carrickalinga Board of Management. That's item 10.1. Sorry, Councillor Kemp.
I'm just talking to myself. Have we done the Audit Committee independent process? 9.11?
Yep. I think, yeah, yes, we have. Councillor Littley.
I'd like to move those recommendations en bloc, if I can.
Certainly. And do I have a seconder for that, Councillor Kemp?
Yes, I've seen it, but I have a perceived conflict of interest as I'm the council representative on the Carrickalinga Board of Management, and I'll be staying in the chamber and I'll be voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Littley, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, thanks. In moving this motion, I have to ask a few questions and have something to say here. I'd like to know how we can be sure that this is a one-off requirement. The request is for a contribution of $4,500 under the donation policy, and it does fall outside of the donation policy in its value, and also due to the reasons that it's money that's already been spent. I'd ask, is there a business plan or roadmap on how the board will rebuild membership and develop activities of programs? Without a business plan or a roadmap, it's really a little bit woolly, as Councillor Robertson would say. Council staff have already broadened the hiring of the facility, putting council support behind this facility, putting it towards this club. I think we stand at risk of criticism, or further criticism I should say, from the youth population of our district, which does not have a centre that they can use and have been able to use for the past 45 years with a history of a peppercorn rent. They don't have a centre where council staff can work to help make it more viable. This is a case I see that repeatedly in this chamber we've had similar questions asked about other service clubs or other clubs to what I'm asking now, when they've requested our support. While I think that we are at risk of criticism, I do think this is a valuable facility and an important club and service, and I will be supporting it, obviously. I've moved it. But just to consider their questions that we ask each and every time, or that are asked, seem to be each and every time we have something very similar from a different cohort.
Thank you, Councillor Littley. Perhaps Councillor Kemp might be able to answer that, Councillor Kemp, given that management
thank you, Mayor Jenkins.
Business plan.
And certainly Councillor Littley raising those issues, which is a common practice that we need to ask these questions to get a better understanding. We all talk about COVID-19 and how it impacts, and this has impacted the running of the centre through the senior citizens programs, where COVID-19 stopped them actually attending and doing what they do in their various activities, which means that there's no money raised, which the board is quite self-sufficient. Leanne Simmons, who's from council staff, actually supports the board of management, and the board of management looks after the building. There's a whole range of maintenance programs, all sorts of things. So they need to raise money through attendance of the various senior citizens clubs. As I said, because of COVID-19, they couldn't attend. So naturally the funds are down. It's most probably should have come to the chamber earlier, but for whatever reason at the time, it most probably until you do your books and everything like that to see where you are financially sitting and what's coming up. But the board does undertake a lot of maintenance stuff. The big maintenance stuff is undertaken by council under their owning the building and etc. But really it's around the fact that it's about getting the senior citizens back again to start their activities, pay their fees, and then support financially the board in order to maintain the building. It is a council building, but it is a service to our senior citizens function. So that is the reason. It's due to the fact that COVID impacted greatly on the people to attend, and it's as simple as it is. And so I guess it's just process of now trying to adjust and certainly, you know, look at getting that money back up in the so at some stage or other, either the board manages itself and raises its money as best it can, or be coming back to council to fix other things through another process, which is not a contribution. So the board is trying to be self-sufficient and independent, and it's asking for help.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Can I just a follow-up question, if I may? Has the board got a business plan in terms of ensuring that they're able to be financially viable?
Generally speaking, they don't have a business plan as written in its format, but they do have plans and processes in place to actually look at, you know, how they raise the monies each financial year through their AGMs and through the various board meetings they have every 3 months. They review their finances on a regular basis and they look at that, but maybe it's something we can talk at board level to, if the council requires the management of the board of management to have some formal documentation put in place. Never asked before, but doesn't mean it can't be done now if that's what the council and this chamber wants.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Littley, sorry to interrupt you.
Through the chair, am I able to ask a question to that? I had asked the question in my opening statement and it hasn't, to my liking, been answered as yet. I've asked, is there a roadmap or a plan, be it a business plan or a roadmap, on how to engage? Because it says in this report and this request that we're going to build the numbers and attract members back. Is there a roadmap as to how to get those members to come back? It's very well to say we need to get their membership fees up, but how do you get members back when that membership has been falling, and I understand it's impacted, the COVID impact has had an impact on memberships across a wide variety of organisations. But I know that our youth have a roadmap or a plan as to what they need to be able to build a strong facility or have a strong membership of a facility. They've been screaming at us for the past 2 years at least, or 20 years really, but we've been hearing it loud and strong for the past 2 years. They have plans and ideas and concepts that would fill a youth centre. So it's just, is there a plan to get the people back in the door so that money does flow membership?
Okay, I'll answer the question. Thank you, Councillor Lilly, for that. Per se of a roadmap plan is not defined as in a document you can pick up and say there. But what it is the roadmap is through that, it's through the representation of the board members who are representing the various senior citizens activities. So like the Tai Chi program, the Bowls Club program, the Bridge Club, all that. There's always a representative from each club attending. So that's the roadmap. Through that process, that it's up to each of the members to raise their own membership and to get there. And there's a fee per membership or a fee per year per club. So in that context, the board does a membership drive. It's the actual clubs who do the membership drive for their own activities. And then they have a representation on the board then to discuss all the financial and the issues that come up on a weekly or daily basis when the activities are undertaken at the centre. So if that answers your question, there's no actual documentation per se. It's done by clubs who attend there, and new clubs always come up and ask if there's the opportunity to participate and hire the facility off the board, which they do, and they have certain criteria they have to meet in the way of indemnities and all sorts of things. Public identity is covered by the board, I think, overall for all the clubs. So it's really about it. It's a club activity run by the clubs, and then they just hire the facility through the fees they pay to the board.
Councillor Lidley, also to answer your question somewhat, as you know, we may not know, in January next year, the council is going to be looking at hiring the facility and rooms to try and get further income. So council certainly themselves have things in place that will help the facility have extra money, and as it says on page 200, the Community Services Review recommended the presence of council staff in the premises 1 day a week, and that will support the growth and development of the centre. But that might help you in some of your concerns. Are there any further, just a moment, Councillor Kemp, did you want to add anything as the seconder for this?
Not really, just the fact that there was an impact, and as everyone has understood, that economically has impacted a lot of clubs, and everyone's been sorting assistance. This is no different. It's just that the membership is finally, of all the clubs who use that facility, are coming back slowly as COVID starts to get with double vaccinations, etc. It's happening. So I think, again, another 6 months' time, things will be looking much better for the facility, and all the clubs will be up and running back to capacity again. But that's up to the clubs to manage that. The board manages the facility and to ensure its maintenance and everything's undertaken.
Thank you. And members, you do know that if you want to, you can vary that or change that funding contribution if you feel that it's not enough or if it's too much as well. I'm just putting that out there for further information for you. Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, two things reminded me of this. I was going to ask a similar question to what Councillor Ridley's already asked, because I've been attending online the very excellent program, the Club BAP program that's put on through the Sport and Rec people, but it's highly relevant to organisations like Carrikalinga there, where they're developing some of those strategic frameworks for operations. But the other and perhaps that could be suggested to them, that they, participate in a couple of those programs. You can see them offline. I mean, they're online, but you can view them afterwards if you think it's worth it. The other one, though, is that I think it brings up the issue of long term. Is that really where the best place is for the organisations that are in that building? It is a very finite space, and it's coming under, as we know. We've had discussions here before about the parking issues and so on. That we, as far as I know, we don't have any plans to look at setting up something in the either in a community centre or separately as a
Councillor Robertson, what you're saying I think is very important to have as a discussion when we're talking about strategy and where we're going. If we can please keep the conversation and the debate in relation to the donation policy and the difficulties, the financial difficulties that the board are having at the moment, that would be appreciated.
Yeah.
Is there anything further anybody wants to say? If not, Councillor Adelaide, do you want to close the debate?
Yeah, I do see this the Carrickonga House as a vital facility and service, and I absolutely support the donation of $4,500 at this point in time. I do encourage the Centre, I'll repeat it again, and the board to start working on a roadmap and start working on those ideas, identify the opportunities to grow membership, not just in the individual participants or groups that use the facility, because there is growing pressure on the resources, the funding, be it at our level, at state level and everything, and the expectation is there that you have a full understanding of what your membership is and how you might gain more members. That's what is faced with every club that applies for any grant at any time, from the smallest grants right through to the big U-Butte grants. To have Carrickonga House equipped with that information and at the ready, should they face this ongoing issue, which we hope that they don't, which we hope that they can come out of the backside of COVID and get up and running better. But, it's not hard to sit down as a collective and start to workshop those ideas on how to build your membership, and it can also be quite enlightening.
Thank you. That closes the debate. I now put the recommendation 1 and 2 on block to the floor. All those in favour and those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. I think it's great that we're able to provide donation to Carrickonga House. We have helped many of our small businesses through COVID, and being able to help our community businesses as well, I think is a really important thing for us to do, especially for our older community where the COVID period has seen many of them a lot more isolated, a lot more anxious, and having somewhere where they can get together and support each other, I think is really important. So I think that's a really great decision that that has been made by you. We now move to 10.2, which is the New Year Eve fireworks and the carbon offsets. And that recommendation, again, I'll do on block if you're happy with that. Councillor Henderson, you happy to move that way? And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Henderson?
Yes, it's really good to see this motion come to the table this evening. Given that an alternative to the fireworks was not found to be feasible, it's good to see that we're taking the next step and talking about carbon offsets for the fireworks. Just a question though, I presume we're not deciding on the type of carbon offset at this stage? That isn't, there are some different options in the discussion, but that's not, none of those options are in the motion itself, in the recommendations themselves.
Graham?
Yeah, through the Mayor, just to clarify, the anticipation is that it would be option C, that's detailed on page 205, paying into an accredited carbon offset project.
Okay, so we are recommending
So, yeah.
option C.
Would you like that included in the recommendation?
Well, I would like to see some local tree planting as part of that carbon offset myself. Yeah, whether we do that in combination with school groups or other community groups, I'm not sure, maybe a combination of all. But I'd like to see some local carbon offsets, because not only does it show our local community that we are aware of carbon offsets and aware of the carbon issues, but also in our climate document coming later in the agenda, we're talking about urban cooling. So it has a double effect: carbon offsets and urban cooling. Gain.
Do you respond to that, Graham?
Thanks, through the Mayor. The notion around purchasing carbon offset or through an offset project is mainly because of the value of it, which is very low. It in fact only equates to $27. So to put that into a local tree project doesn't take the local tree project all that far. So part of the report talks about not really doing this in isolation, although for the purpose of this exercise, in some respects we are, but we're also in the process of Council's Climate Agenda 2030 plan. So it would be anticipated that things could be looked at a little bit more holistically through that process, as well as the draft festival and event strategy, so that all our events are looked at through the same lens, basically.
Thank you.
Councillor Robertson, do you want to say anything?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Precisely what Councillor Henderson was saying about having a local carbon offset arrangement. I just came back from last week attending the Future Energy Conference at Flinders University, and this is precisely the sort of thing that we should have in this climate agenda program here, is having carbon offset programs that we run ourselves that are very local, even if it's $27, but sending it up to wherever it is in Adelaide, that or we run from Adelaide, it's not getting us anywhere. We need to offset that, if you really want to offset that with something that's local. But it is amazing that the extent to which the fireworks industry has come in the last few years, in terms of the amount for which they've really cut down enormously on the amount of greenhouse gases and other side effects that come from these fireworks. Still look forward to light displays, etc. But the extent to which the industry itself is really moving forward is great. But yep, I would like to see us do option A, and I was thinking of Coast Care, the Hindmarsh Valley Group, but also the Rotary Clubs are doing a lot of tree planting. So yes, $27 doesn't go far in terms of those programs, but if we wanted to give a bit more than that, say it's for the fireworks, pretend that it's bigger, the offset that's got to be, then that would be the way to do it. Yeah.
Not sure that we'll go very far in pretending. I think transparency will wipe out. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Schofield?
Sorry, if I could just suggest that could we be explicit, because it does say in the report here that it's that the easiest thing to do is to go to option C, but could we make it the opportunity to say we
we've
go
got
for option A?
We've got a motion on the table at the moment, and
Maybe move a third motion? I move a third motion that we,
I'm just about to ask Councillor Schofield to speak. Councillor Robertson, you have spoken. Councillor Schofield, can you please continue?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the staff for a very comprehensive report here. It's exceptional, actually. It's really great. Look, given I guess the time and where we're sitting within budgets and that, I will support the motion, but I do feel that if we were really serious, $27 given to a centre to offset carbons really doesn't do very much at all, because you're balancing off somebody else's. So whether next year we could consider, and we start looking at it now, there are grants through the landscape and board that would cover. I mean, we could pick up a few $1,000s for planting quite a few trees, and I'd like to see us look at that for next year, given we're only a few weeks out from New Year's Eve. So I'll support the motion as it sits, but I would like to see us investigate some other options and yes, involve the school children. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. That they learn that if they want to see these nice things like fireworks, there is something that we have to give in return, and that is a simple thing as planting a tree. And if everybody in Victor Harbour had 1 or 2 trees in their garden, we would be creating a fantastic environment for future generations.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. I just wonder whether or not you understand the actual motion. In terms of the $27, that relates to 690 kilograms of carbon is worth only $27. And it may be, as the council refines its environmental projects, I think as was suggested, when there are any markets or any events that council puts on, that all of those carbon offsets be captured together, and they'll be worth a lot more money, and we may be able to do more with them than rather just focusing on individual assets. I think that's what somebody said. So just to clarify what the motion actually refers to. Is there any further discussion in relation to the motion? Councillor Hales?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. It's actually a question in relation to the report attached. The budget implication lists a budget report expenditure of $50, but that $50 manages to have a $950 impact on the budget line. So I assume the $50 figure is correct given the $27 value of it, and that it should read $950 in the remaining budget, or $37,950. Cool, thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Henderson, do you want to close the debate? No, in that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried, thank you. We now have item 12.1, the Waipinga Road encroachment, lot 2. Councillor Glasbrook.
Yeah, I'll declare a conflict of interest and leave the room. This is my nephew's property, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. The recommendation, if you would like to have that done en bloc, I'm happy to take that en bloc. Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield? Councillor Henderson? Does anybody want to speak to that? No. Councillor Kemp?
Just a question for clarification. The payment of this, if it gets up, is it this financial year or could it be held over to next financial year to just ensure, we look after our budget a bit better? No, it's only a small amount in consideration what we spend, but I'm just wondering if it is a requirement to be done immediately or is it delayed?
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, through the Mayor. There's no legal requirement on us to pay it this year. I guess it's the negotiation with the landholder themselves. So we'd need to go, they're aware that it's coming to the chamber tonight. So we just need to go back to the landholder, I guess. But I guess it's at council's discretion. There's no legal requirement for us to do it now. Although, yeah, we could delay if you think appropriate.
Is there any further commentary on recommendation? If not, Councillor Schofield, did you want to close? No. If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Just get Councillor Glasbrook back in. We now move to item 12.2, which is the climate agenda, and the recommendation is receiving and noting the report. Moving that way, Councillor Hales, and seconding that, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Hales, do you want to speak to that as the mover? No. Councillor Henderson, would you like to speak to it? Does anybody want to speak to it? Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's a useful agenda to get going with. One of the things I would like to have seen in there, given that you see on page 222 the 9 key activities that are here, and the agriculture is not part of this this plan. But we have great opportunities down here to be not only contributing significantly to the betterment of the climate, but also to be sequestering carbon, but it's not part of our commitments. And we're only measuring emissions rather than sequestration. In that sense, I think it could be, it's a very urban-based agenda, but just another question for clarity for me, and that is that this is the one for Victor Harbour, the whole district for the council. It's not just for the council, is it?
Kathy?
Thank you, through the Mayor. That's correct. So this is what council is doing, but obviously we'll be working with community. But if you're talking in relation, for example, to the carbon auditing, that is for council.
Yeah, because to me, it's a pretty narrow agenda. I mean, this council has done a lot over the last few years in terms of offsetting and is doing more. If we get real about this stuff, we'll start passing, policies where we're saying new buildings should be carbon neutral and energy positive. We haven't done that yet. We do a lot of other things on paper. Stick it in as an achievement. If you're looking for practical action, though, we should also be looking at to what extent we're putting carbon back into, taking it out of the atmosphere, for instance. And there's lots of things. I've had the benefit of going up to this conference in Adelaide. There are just loads of things that we can be doing, as a council, as a kind of an advocate, the council as a kind of a holder of significant assets and so on, to be pushing this sort of agenda. You know, the ones that make everyone feel warm and fuzzy, like having electric vehicles and so on, that's fine. But, you know, it's a bigger agenda out there which we can buy into. So, yeah, this is great, but to me, we should be thinking already, not just at not the council level. We should be thinking of not the council as an institution, but the council as a place, and then the South Coast is where we have a lot to offer, and there's a lot. Some of our neighbouring councils are way behind on this stuff, so I mean, we have an advocacy role as well. So to me, it's one that we ought to be moving beyond just measuring council's carbon emissions.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do you want to respond, Director Hayden?
Thank you, through the Mayor. I agree with you, Councillor Robertson. There are lots of things we can do. Just to note that this is the activity that we'll just be doing in 21-22. Some of this is to collect our baseline to enable us to take different kinds of action and to set us up also to engage some of the community, and noting the discussion before about the different carbon offsets and how we should be including this in all of our considerations, in all of our programming, in all of our infrastructure. We are starting to look at those things. So we are starting to look at the cost effectiveness of recycled materials, for example. So we're looking at a lot more, but some of this sets us up for future years. But this is just what we will do this year, so until June next year.
Right, Kathy. I thought that what we were looking at was not this financial year, it's this thing, which is a 10-year program, isn't it?
Through the Mayor.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yes and no. So through the Mayor, what we have said is that we need to start walking the talk, basically. However, this local action plan is something that all of the resident hills and coasts partners are looking at doing, and we decided we'd make it annual. So we'd start implementing annual action, but what we're saying is it needs to be a much broader agenda. We need to embed it in everything we do, and hence 2030. But what's described here is just what we're doing. I mean, we did a bit of a snapshot of what's been done to date, but this, the 9 things that you listed or spoke about there, is just what we will do in 21-22.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. I've actually got a couple of questions myself. Kathy might be able to answer. And part of it goes into perhaps what Councillor Robertson was asking. Has this been to the agribusiness group to look at what the agribusiness group who represent the farmers in the region say that perhaps needs to be done in terms of climate change for them? And if not, it may be a good idea to include them in the consultations. And the second one was, I know that Councillor Henderson and Director Sanford, I think last year or the year before, went to Melbourne and had a look at the electric vehicles over there. To what extent is the council looking at replacing any of their vehicles when they come time for replacement with electric vehicles or low emissions vehicles?
Thank you, Mayor. Through the Mayor. So two questions there. One on the electric vehicles. We did actually look to do a more detailed study or business case for electric vehicles this year, but our colleagues in Adelaide Hills Council have just completed a business case, and we know from them that at the moment what they've found is it's not worth it, it's not viable at the moment, but we're still looking at that. And we will keep an eye on that, potentially again in another couple of years. Our operations team have been looking at electric trucks, so the bigger fleet, and the market is getting better, but we're still not quite there yet. So we are continuing to look at that, and we're also looking at for our fleet vehicles. One of the challenges for us is our budgets. The budget we have allocated for our fleet vehicles at the moment doesn't cover electric vehicles, so that may mean that we need to eventually come back to the chamber and put something to them, but we think we're not quite there yet. In terms of the agribusiness group, no, this hasn't been to the agribusiness group, but we certainly will. This is our first cab off the rank, but certainly I think there's a lot broader consultation we can do in trying to look much more holistically at what we're doing in the region.
I think dung beetles are something that work, don't they? Councillor Robertson, for carbon offsets.
Yes, but there's also dung beetles, have an impact, but there's also a lot in terms of what we're doing in this council area with regard to water security, as well as, I mean, farmers, you know, getting stuck into sequestering carbon, improving soil moisture absorption and so on, means less runoff, which has its own, whoops.
If there anybody else that needs to speak, thank you, Councillor Henderson. You've already spoken.
That's the question, actually, triggered by the conversation. I'm wondering, a question to the CEO really, and maybe to Kathy too. Does the LGA have discussions with the federal government in line with the possibility of reducing the cost of electric fleet vehicles to make it more feasible for local governments to buy such vehicles?
Thank you, through the Mayor. At this stage, no, not that I'm aware of, because it has been something we've been looking at. I know within our current state, there are some conversations in regards to our current government and the opposition in regards to the subsidy in regards to fleet vehicles, electric vehicles, but nothing from an LGA perspective. But it's probably something we can raise with them, because we obviously aren't orphans in that state, and we have a huge amount of expense, capital expense on our fleet, so do every other council.
I wonder whether or not you may recall at the last, actually it might not have been the last council meeting, if something came through from Kyla, if we have anything that we want to take to the LGA AGM next year, then we need to get it back to her. It may be worthwhile having a discussion about the LGA actually working with both state and lobbying federal government in relation to environmental issues. That might be something that we discuss outside of this chamber at another time. Councillor Hales, if there's no further debate, Councillor Hales, did you want to close the debate?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I think we've had some good discussion around this topic, and I just wanted to touch on some of the stuff that Councillor Robertson touched on, because I totally agree with the ambition behind his comments in regards to what we should do in the realm of planning. If only we still had local government planning powers that enabled us to fulfil that. I'm happy to jump in the trenches with you and take it to the state, because realistically over the last couple of decades they've been eroding local planning control to such a point that such a thing isn't viable under the existing code, which is a loss for our community and every community really, in terms of their ability to control their own destiny and control what they would like to see in the terms of development locally. And I think also we should, I guess, while we don't have control of that, be looking at how we as council itself develop and the buildings that we're going to put in the ground and build up, and absolutely, I guess, lead from the perspective of showing what our community, what it looks like to build buildings that are neutral to the environment and that cancel out their own cost. But that does come with a price tag. It comes with an attached premium in order to achieve that outcome. But it's absolutely a cost that I think we should be willing to pay, because it is about taking that leadership position on a very important issue to the future of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. That closes the debate. Sorry, Councillor Robertson, that closes the debate. If we go to the recommendation, that council receive and note the report, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to 12.3, which is the mountain bike strategy. And the recommendation I'm happy to do on block. If someone would like to move it on block, receiving and noting. Thank you, Councillor Kemp. And the second one is endorsing. The Councillor Kemp moving that on block, and sorry, I didn't see Councillor Henderson seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp.
Thanks, Mayor Jenkins. It's just, I think this Victor Harbour mountain bike strategy is a great document. It actually sets a great direction for the future of bringing another activity, which is, helps our destination branding to come down here and enjoy what we have, and mountain bike strategy will do that. So if we do it right, we'll make a world-class area. If we don't, then I guess people won't come. But the strategy is great, but at least it's in a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Henderson, did you want to say anything? Does anybody else want to say anything? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, we have the minutes of different council committee meetings now. The Fleurieu Regional Community Services Advisory Meeting. Would someone like to move the recommendation that council receive and note the minutes? Councillor Hales moving that way and Councillor Henderson seconding that. Either of you want to speak to it? Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Southern Communities Transport Scheme Advisory Committee meeting notes to the council to receive and note them. Moved by Councillor Hales again and Henderson seconding that. Either of you want to speak to it? Anybody want to speak? Those in favour? Those against? The Audit Committee meeting. Minutes, receiving and noting them. Aye. Thank you, Councillor Littley. And do I have a seconder for those? Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Do either of you want to speak to them? Councillor Glasbrook.
Yeah, just to make a point in relation to the comment in the recommendation that there was no specific thing said by the Audit Committee, but there really was one on page 160 or 161, I think, depending on your computer or paper. The Audit Committee recommended that the reminds Council to continue investing in renewal of assets rather than new assets. So I think that's important. The Audit Committee obviously have the opinion that we're spending a lot of money on new things and not be careful that we keep maintaining things as well. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you. Thank you,
Councillor Glasbrook. Councillor Kemp, you want to speak to the recommendation?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Look, just to carry on from Councillor Glasbrook, did the Audit Committee, when they talked about looking at the proportionate to new assets, are they looking at a figure of 50-50 or 60-40 ratio proportionate? Every time we spend 60% on new, we should be spending 40 on renewable or anything like that. It's just a statement. Leaving it to the council to decide what the proportionate percentage should be from the Audit Committee.
I don't think it was discussed a proportion unless the staff. No, there wasn't a proportion discussed. It was just something that they've been noticing with their expenditure, and it's something that they think we should address. We could perhaps ask them if you wish.
Look, yeah, I'll ask through the CEO or through the Director Hayter of how she sees that statement as to what we're doing in the area of renewables compared to new. What ratio are we at the moment? I know it's off the cuff, but or have you thought about that process or how we would go about it?
Sorry, I'm just going to add, and Kathy can add to if she wishes to. So we don't have a percentage. Obviously, your council's asset management plans basically dictate most of that requirement for renewal. So, where it is, we've got that distribution of new and renewal, but that we stick to our asset management plans, because that should really council it keeping on top of and maintaining its assets, current assets, as opposed to new ones. And we have, over a period of time, aid some of our renewal for new things, but if we stick to our asset management plans, we should be fairly targeted about that. But we don't actually have a percentage ratio as what's new and what's renewal. We're happy to find that out for you. But.
Just before Kathy responds, I suppose the only data we have at the moment is really how much money we spend on renewal compared to new. I guess that may give us indication how spending apart from activities, I guess. Yeah, and the dollar value, unfortunately, probably isn't the best indicator, because sometimes an asset of a low value has a significant impact. If we don't renew it, it can cost us greatly. So it's not always value based. I think it's about what assets we're continuing to renew and maintain.
Kelly, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Just in terms of that breakdown between the renewal and the new, each of the budgets in the uniform presentation of finances has two separate lines for amounts expended on renewal of assets and amounts expended on new assets. So that you would be able to have a look at either the statements, the uniform presentation of finances that is in the long-term financial plan to get that breakdown as well. So it would be easy to find what the percentage is based on the current asset management plans. But in terms of what Victoria said around the asset management plans, set what needs to be spent. From the discussion at the Audit Committee, I believe it was more around making sure that we don't defer renewal projects for newer projects on an ongoing basis, because that is when we start to get behind on the renewal of those assets.
Thank you. And do you want to add anything, Kath?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Just briefly to add to CEO and Kelly's, you might recall during the budget process, we also, acknowledging the importance of renewal and keeping on our renewal program, we also, if you like, quarantined the renewal and made the new part of our budget the discretionary part, and we did set aside and said our renewal program needs to stay intact in order for us to catch up and to make good on that program.
Thank you. Councillor Hales.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. While we're highlighting recommendations out of the Audit Committee minutes, I'd just like to highlight the other half of the recommendation that had that comment in it, which is where the Audit Committee endorsed the 2021-22 September budget review. I think it's important that if we're taking their wisdom on one half, we should take their wisdom on the other half as well. So absolutely happy with their comments.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Are there any further comments? Councillor Lidley, did you want to close the debate? No. I'll put this to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. It is just after 8 o'clock, so we might have a 10-minute break. If you come just after 8:15, then we can get back to business with item 13.4. So have a big stretch and wriggle around. Thank you. Okay, it is 8:15. Welcome back. We are up to item 13.4, which is the minutes of the CASPAC meeting on the 2nd of November. The first recommendation is that we receive and note the report. If someone would like to move that way. Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And thank you, Councillor Robertson. Do either of you want to speak to receiving and noting the report? No? Does anybody want to speak to that? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The recommendation 2 and 3, if you're happy for me to do that on block, I will. If someone would like to move recommendation 2 and 3. Thank you, Councillor Robertson, and seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Hales. Do either of you want to speak to that recommendation 2 or 3? No. Councillor Hales? No. Does anybody want to speak to it? In that case, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 4 is the McKinley Street car park design update, and I'd like someone to move that recommendation.
Yeah, Jenkins. Sorry, just before we move this one, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest as council's representative on the council assessment panel. So I will remove myself from the chamber for this item.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. I'll wait till you go. Yep, we'll just wait for Councillor Hales to go, and your amendment. Yep. So the McKinley Street update, design update finishes at register at attachment C. And then recommendation 5 is that a development application be prepared and lodged through the state planning portal. Okay. So I would ask, so you're moving that way, Councillor Robertson, and I will ask someone to second that. That first part of your the first part, or motion 4 now, recommendation 4. Councillor Littley. Councillor Robertson, do you want to speak to your motion? Yeah, but do you want to speak to recommendation 4? Right, Councillor Littley, do you want to speak to recommendation 4? Does anybody want to speak to recommendation 4? Councillor Kemp?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I'm not supporting this motion. The whole idea of this McKinley Street multi-deck car park, I know it's been on the agenda for a long time, but the only reason why it's sort of been in the last 2 years because of the Anchorage development, which now they're doing their own program. They don't require a multi-deck car park any further. And with consultations throughout the community at various places, the indication I'm getting is that we don't need a multi-deck car park yet. Maybe in the future at some time, but not at the moment. People can't see the reasons why we need to spend that amount of money. The other option, the other issue is that even though we have $2 million in the long-term financial plan for this, but we don't have the full costings under the asset management plan, which is around $12 million, whatever those figures is going to be, or 15, or whatever the figure is. It's not in our asset management plan to look at this holistically, and to go out now to start building final designs and doing a development application, I think it's premature because it doesn't fall in line with our long-term financial plan or our asset management plan as we have it at the moment. And of course, and do we really need a multi-deck car park at this stage? I don't believe we do.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Schofield?
Thank you. Yes, I will be supporting this. I believe that we really need to be looking at the parking around Victor Harbour as our city grows, and coming out of COVID again. It is very difficult to get a park, and with our parking spaces being reduced each time we do upgrades, the members of the public that I've spoken to, and I guess there are the fors and the against and everything, can't wait for it, and they're asking when is it going to come ahead and be developed. So I'll be supporting this, and I think this is part of us being an active council and a council that's looking into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Thank you. Councillor Robertson, you, oh no, you haven't, I beg your pardon. Councillor Robertson and then Councillor Glasbrook.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, whilst I appreciate what Councillor Kemp is saying, I think that that the confirmation that
Can I just call a
Sorry,
point here, because Councillor Robertson would be closing the debate. That's.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. You did move it, Councillor Robertson. I will ask you to close the debate. You didn't want to speak about it when you moved it, but I will give you the opportunity to close it afterwards. So I will ask Councillor Glasbrook to speak, and if no one else wants to speak, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, no, look, I'm not going to support this either. You know, as I said in the Casback meeting, this was never on our immediate radar. It was always a strategic thing that was there for into the future when we really need it. It was brought forward because we had an opportunity to partner with a local business, which was a great opportunity, and unfortunately council, you know, were very, very unsuccessful in being able to come to an agreement with that developer, and I believe it's left our community far worse off. So without that partnership, I really don't believe that this is a viable proposition at the moment. A lot of people, when you really talk to them about this multi-deck car park, I don't believe are in favour of it. It's going to mean that under this model, more than likely we'll see paid parking throughout the town centre, which I don't really believe that we're quite ready for that yet either. I believe that, as Councillor Kemp said, it's not in our long-term plan, and it has never been in our long-term plan. We've got a plan that is absolutely full to the brim, which is going to take us up to a significant debt level. So I really can't see how we can push this forward. We'd be better off putting our time and effort and resources into programs that are in our asset management plan. Or, I didn't say anything during that agenda item, the mountain bike strategy. That is a great opportunity for our community. And if you look at our economic development strategy, it says that we need to be careful what we partner with and what we choose to support. And I can assure you that that mountain bike strategy will bring far more benefit to our community than this car park economic benefit. So I was strongly in favour of the car park if we could have a successful negotiation with a private enterprise, but unfortunately that hasn't happened. So at this stage, I'm afraid I'm not in favour of it.
Before I ask Councillor Robertson to close the debate, does anybody else want to say anything? Councillor Mann and then Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a question to administration. Does finalising this draft street car park design that we've been working on for quite some time now mean that we're going to be building it in the next year?
Ron?
Through the Mayor, no, that wasn't necessarily the intent. The intent that Council had when it sort of proceeded with this stage of the project was to have something that's ready for when an opportunity did come up.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. I guess, yeah, talking to that, that's exactly what I'm happy to support tonight, preparing the town and for this strategic project for when that opportunity arises. And I think going down such a significant avenue of work that's been done and time and expense by administration, this is the next stage in that process to have that ready for when that desire, when that time and that need arises. That I'm hearing around the chamber that there is going to be a time and that there will be a need for it. I don't think that's being refused. So I think that that's going to happen. The time on that is still to be determined, but this isn't talking to that. It's talking to finalising this design, what I'm supporting.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Henderson?
Strategic planning is about planning towards the future, and I really think we need to be talking about this car park and going to the next stage and applying for a planning development application. We are becoming short of parking in our city, and that's only going to get worse. If we attract people here based on new developments such as the mountain bike strategy, that will bring more people in, we'll need more parking. So everything we do to attract our visitors will push towards a greater need for more parking in our city. And I would advise any of the councillors in the chamber who have any doubts about how a car park can revitalise the city centre, you all take a drive to Murray Bridge and look at how their city centre has been revitalised with the building of a multi-storey car park with other adjacent businesses right next to their brand new hotel, but not attached to and not dependent on the hotel at all. So look elsewhere and see what other councils are doing.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, you
Have a question.
If it's a
Yeah,
question.
I didn't speak to start with, but I do have a question, and that is quite simply, what is the cost or estimated cost of finalising this draft plan or draft design?
Through the Mayor, it was in the CASPAC report when it went to the committee a couple of weeks ago, and there was an estimate there for the purpose of finalising the design, submitting the application, doing the traffic management reports, etc., in the order of $40,000.
Can you just confirm, you said submitting the application as in the second part of this development application?
Yes.
We're not discussing that at this point, so it would be a reasonable or large cost involved in submitting the application?
I think the application, I did find out the costs for that. It would be $10,000 to $15,000 perhaps for the application.
If there's no further questions or commentary, Councillor Robertson, would you like to close the debate? Can? Can you turn your microphone on, please?
Thanks. The design that's being requested in this particular motion, this is one that goes beyond concept drawings. This is one that goes to the full development application design mode, right?
Through the Mayor, it's not full development applications, it's planning application. So that's part of the development application. So it's not the detailed design specification.
Okay, right. Yeah.
That's it. Do you want to close the debate?
Yes. Yeah, I think it can understand. Very understandable that we have here. Okay, this is not an immediate need as such, since the original intention of having it part of the anchorage is no longer there. But of course, there's the longer term issue and us needing to be shovel ready for that. In a couple of years, we'll be working on, in accordance to the long-term, financial plan, the Arts and Culture Centre, which absolutely depends on having that car park in place. We have confirmation, I believe, that the anchorage will be going ahead. I think that particular project will always do in whatever form it was going to take. It will be a catalyst for further investment in Victor Harbour, perhaps for another hotel. then they're going to face the same issues of, well, how do we deal with car parking? So I think that we may find that we'll find a potential partner for it sooner than we expected. Not in the next year or so for sure, but in near future. And that we do need to need to be ready for potential opportunities to come forward. So, yep, my thinking is that we should be getting this job done.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. That closes the debate on that recommendation. I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you.
All of division. Thank you.
Certainly. All those in favour? Councillor Mann. Councillor Littley. Councillor Robertson. Councillor Henderson. And Councillor Schofield. Against Councillor Glasbrook and Councillor Kemp. That recommendation carried. We now move to recommendation 5. And recommendation 5 is that a development application be prepared and lodged through the state planning portal by Councillor Henderson and seconded by Councillor Schofield. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield? Does anybody want to speak to it? Councillor Kemp?
Just a question to start with. Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. To Director Pathouse, under a development application like this to the state planning portal, under the new code, is there a time limit on once you get approval for a development application as to when you progress the next stages to construction times? Because I would imagine you don't want development applications sitting on the books for years and nothing happens. So is there a timeline that we may have to commit to?
Through the Mayor, the timeline for a development application planning approval, it's a 12-month approval, 2 years, it's changed to 2 years now, before you need to then do the building certification side of things, although there are multiple extensions that you can have to your approval. It really only becomes a problem if the policy provisions within the area change as a result of a development plan amendment, a code amendment as they're called under the new system. That's not likely to happen for a little while because the new system was only turned on, switched on in March this year, which set the current policy area as it is at the moment.
Is there any further discussion?
Can I ask a question, please? It's along the lines of timing also, and that is what kind of timing would be required to start up to get a development application? Should we seek to get grant funding or apply for some funding there? So how long would it take for a development application to land on their desk before it was given approval? All things considered, that the application is of a standard that's going to be approved.
I'm not sure if I quite get the question. Is it how long will the development application take to process?
How quickly could we put the plan in place should we want to go after some funding? Without, if we don't have a development application,
so on the basis that it's approved and ready to go and shovel ready, it would still need and then there was an opportunity for grant funding or partnership with a third party developer. It would still need to go through the detailed design specification process. That's the quicker part of the process because that's really just a design that's applied to standards, fixed engineering standards, calculations and the like. The planning's a bit different. The planning sort of tests the policy provisions within the area. So the planning side of it's usually the part that brings you the certainty that it can go ahead, and then the rest is just engineering around what that is. So in terms of a time frame, if you were to press go on a full design specification after you have your planning approval, that might be a 3-month exercise to get that done, get your building certification in place, and then combine those together to get what's called your full development approval.
Thank you. Councillor.
Second question, or was it? Councillor Robertson moved it. I'll just have a second question if I may before you speak.
No, Councillor Henderson moved it and Councillor Schofield seconded it. So Councillor Robertson can speak and then you can ask a question. Councillor Kemp. Councillor Robertson.
Mine wasn't a question, it was a comment. Yeah. The reason I'm not so happy about this particular motion is that I think that in terms of explaining this to the community, in terms of, yeah, we're going out for development application for this car park, then that's going to raise all sorts of questions that I'm not sure that we want them or to have to try and answer them, because we won't have a partner for this development. I mean, the grant funding for this sort of thing is pie in the sky. We haven't got, as far as we know, any other partners to go with us on this. So while I'm all in on having a car park design that's ready to go, that if we move down the path of going into a development application, then we'd have to be explaining to the community why are we doing this at this point in time, because what have we got out there that tells us that we need to go and get development approval for this now, and we haven't got anything. So to me, it's a dangerous path to be heading down.
You have a question, Councillor Lidley?
I haven't spoken to it yet.
Okay.
I'll ask the question.
Councillor Kemp had a question.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Again, I guess Director Padhouse, or even to the CEO McCurdy, if she wants to answer this one. Does administration have a plan in place, thinking strategically like we are and like we do sometimes, that, you know, once we get development approval through the portal, do we have a plan to bring back to the chamber approval to spend money on a building consent design and specification once the approval is given by a development application? Do I need to clarify the question?
Through the Mayor. Don't have a plan to do that in the near future, given it was on the proviso that we would be ready. Obviously, we wanted to test the development process in regards to the connection where it is with the other heritage buildings in that area, and it was also still being prepared if possibly the anchorage was still in consideration. They still need to lodge their third development application and go through a process with SCAP. Just because it sits with SCAP doesn't give it any guarantees for a third development approval. So the council always had the intent to be ready in case that came up. But also, obviously, if there was any other opportunities for partnerships, because we did have other opportunities on the table for other partnerships as well. So, but in terms of, as administration, do we have plans to come for detailed design to that next stage? No, not at this stage. We felt that we would have got through that planning process, had that planning approval, understood where it sat from a heritage level, and then we would wait.
Just touching on that as well.
Yep.
And just to follow on from that, the plan essentially, and it's detailed in that project actions register at attachment C, and granted you don't have the benefit of that as an attachment to this report because that was in the CASPAC agenda. But essentially that details the plan, and that is that it sits at a hold point, okay, in terms of the physicality of it, the physical progressing of the project. But it's there ready in case an opportunity arises. And then what happens beyond that is a level of operational modelling that I think Councillor Kemp spoke to in an earlier workshop about the matter. Continued efforts to accommodate opportunity for developer collaboration, whether that's with the Anchorage or any other developer that happens our way. And then there was also an integrated site planning component, bearing in mind that the entirety of that site is the strategic site that council has for longer term parking. So the whole idea was to get it to a point so that it doesn't stop other things from happening, hold that point while council then goes ahead and continues some of the investigations, research around other strategic opportunities that might exist for the entirety of the site. So it's not done in isolation. So that's essentially what's the plan is. There's no fixed timeframes around that or absolutes around any of it. But that's essentially the sort of the sequence of actions.
Thank you, Graham. You have a question, Councillor Lidley?
Oh, I have a comment because I had a question first. I've only asked a question in this debate.
Okay.
Yep. And that was, what's the timing for a development plan?
Yep.
I'm very pleased that, Graham, you've raised the point, the whole point, that this is to get it to a hold point. I would feel more comfortable, and I'm quite pleased that Councillor Robertson split this, these two recommendations into two parts, because I'm more comfortable with the whole point that we're already at after that part 4, then moving to the whole point of submitting a development application or a planning application. While there's risk that our community will see a more detailed design as council is going to build it, like that's going to be the risk. We saw that with Grosvenor Gardens. The moment you put a design out, well, this is exactly what's going to happen. Well, we hadn't made that decision. So there is that risk. But I feel that if we're in a position where we've got our design down and we're in agreement with that, and we can act quickly should we see the opportunity for a grant application, or should things happen at our neighbours in the private capacity that they don't get their applications as need, we can go forward with a design and putting in an application that would also suit that project to perhaps help there. So I'm not going to support this motion. I'm very happy to support the previous one, and it's much of a muchness really, but I'm pretty happy to sit here in the in-between stage.
Councillor Hendis, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Major. Question. I guess some of the sentiment I'm hearing around the change, that the current point is that safer hold space, and I don't know whether it's being inferred that going to this next stage as a hold point, lodging the development application and then holding there. Also, I see that, as you're saying, there's greater strategic ability from that point to move quickly. What is the detriment of getting to that point and holding? You mentioned about there was a 2-year period and then extensions. How long could that hold point before there's any real detriment or council may face around?
In terms of the risk that the application expires? Yeah, you have around five years, okay? But that also depends on what point you've brought it to by the time you get to that 5 years. So it could be 5 years that you then get a building certification in place, which essentially starts the clock again. So yes, there's certain things that would have to start happening within 5 years. or around about the 5-year mark is the stretch. Can I just comment very quickly that part of the approach around not so much the design but preparing the project for a development application was also around reviewing the traffic impact. That's more about submitting a development application than the current design, albeit that one of the elected members is keen on seeing traffic elements associated with that particular, from a transport perspective. Of course, there'll be traffic elements, it's a car park, but from a transport interchange type or station type perspective, terminal type perspective. The idea was to get some bang for buck through that traffic analysis as well, to look at that particular aspect of the site to see whether that was suitable. I would suggest that if you don't proceed to a development application at the moment, you'd probably question the merit of a traffic impact analysis at this point in time. So just something to think about.
Thank you very much. I think everybody has spoken, and so I might ask Councillor Henderson, who moved the motion, to close the debate.
Yes, I think Director Pathouse has shown us very clearly, in my opinion, that it is strategically more beneficial to lodge a development application now. So I'm in favour of this motion.
Thank you. That closes the debate. I'd ask all those in favour and those against. That motion is lost.
Call a division, please.
Sure. All those in favour? Councillor Mann? Councillor Henderson? Sorry, Colin. Councillor Schofield? And against is Councillor Littley. Councillor Glasbrook. Councillor Kemp and Councillor Robertson. Motion is lost. Just grab Councillor Hales back. That's the last one from... We are now on item 14.1, the representative reports, and the recommendation is that Council receive and note the reports for November. Moved by Councillor Schofield, seconded by Councillor Henderson. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like to ask about the representative reports? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to 14.2, which is the Southern and Hills Local Government Association Charter Review. And you may remember that this has been to Council previously, and we approved the review at Council. Under the Southern Hills LGA, the charter has to be approved by every single council that is in that LGA. And there were a couple of councils that did not approve it, and so that's resulted in a couple of proposed amendments to the draft. And you'll see those amendments on the bottom of page 294, being no sitting fees. Previously, the board was allowed to set fees, even though there are no fees at the moment. Unanimous member council vote to alter the charter. Previously it was a 2/3 vote to alter the charter. And all board members are eligible to be an office bearer. Previously only elected members were available. but the other councils thought that all board members should be available to be an office bearer. So those are the changes that were under debate. So the recommendation is that the council receive and note the review report, and that the City of Victor Harbor notes the Southern Hills Government Association Board endorsement of the draft charter and approves the amendments that are made to it. Would someone like to move that recommendation en bloc? Thank you, Councillor Robertson. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Any commentary, Councillor Robertson? No, Councillor Glasbrook?
Yeah, I'll just say congratulations for listening to these people. It's good to see that the democratic process has been followed. I wish the same process had been followed with the Waste Authority when there was a council that disagreed with what they had said, and instead of listening, they just bulldozed on. So I think it's nice to be listened to, even though this council had no problems. I think it's great that we listen to the other councils, and that's the way it should be.
Thank you, Councillor Glasbrook. Is there any further commentary? Any questions? I will put that to the vote. All those in favour and those against? That's carried. Thank you. Uh, 14. The Regional Development Adelaide Hills, Fleurieu and Kangaroo Island Funding Agreement. I'll do that on block as the first recommendation is received and noting the report. The second recommendation is related to the new round of funding and authorising the funding agreement as read. Would somebody move on block? Councillor Kemp, you happy to move that on block? Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to that?
No, it's just that I guess it's just one of those partnerships arrangements that we have with the Regional Development Australia. It does support our council in a lot of different ways. Yes, the funding agreement is increasing. That's just CPI, I suppose. But again, it's, I guess if we're getting more value out of it than what we're paying for, I think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Schofield, did you want to speak? No. Does anybody have any questions or want to speak to it? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, the part one of the second recommendation, the new round of funding, basically it says in here that that's going to be CPI. Well, yeah, but my question is that should it be more than CPI? If we think we're getting value out of this institution, why limit it to CPI, which is of course a complete furphy of a measure to be including in of course CPI is a basket of expenditures out of household income and has nothing to do with the real costs of doing business which the RDA does.
This is how much funding they've asked for, Councillor Robertson.
Yep.
Do you want to give them more than what they've asked for?
I just put it out there as being that, you know, we're going into a new round of funding. No one in this report has questioned whether it should be, and they put it forward on the knowledge that, yeah, everyone agrees to everything going up by CPI. But to me, a lot of the report here would tend towards the issue of, well, you know, is CPI the most valid way of looking at the increase? But anyway, it's for a three-year amount. So if it's locked in at the CPI for this year, then it'll go up a fairly small amount. If it's in a couple of years' time, I think it would be a fair bit more. Then the cost of doing business is going to be a lot more at that time too.
Thank you.
So that was the first thing I had about that, and that was that, yeah, although we've got one of the other issues that I just want to highlight is that the RDA board's mandate, some parts of it look a lot like what you would expect coming from a Chamber of Commerce. And so just highlight top of page 344, the third item down there, which is connecting regional businesses, councils and industry sectors with international trade partners, financial markets and potential investors. And yeah, I think what we should be encouraging at the local government level is the growth of our chambers of commerce, and that's where those jobs should lie rather than with RDA. But they do a lot of other useful things as well.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Is there any further commentary or any questions? Councillor Kemp, did you want to close the debate? Say anything? No. In that case, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? Sorry, Councillor Littley, were you in favour? Yep. Can we just do that again? All those in favour and those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Victor Harbour Authority first quarter budget review. And I'm happy to read in the recommendation and read that it's an unchanged contribution from council. Would someone like to move that recommendation en bloc? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. And somebody seconding that. Thank you, Councillor Littley. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Schofield? Councillor Littley? Any questions, or does anybody want to speak to it? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. The recommendation that's en bloc to the floor. All those in favour and those against? That's carried. Thank you. 15.1 are the member reports and the mayoral report coming first. Would somebody like to move that? Thank you, Councillor Robertson and Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to the mayoral report or have any questions? Does anybody have any questions or want to speak to it? If not, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour and those against? That's carried. Thank you. The elected member reports for November. There is just one from Councillor Schofield. Would someone like to move the recommendation? Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson, and seconding that. Thank you, Councillor Littley. Either of you want to speak to that? Does anyone have any questions for Councillor Schofield or want to speak to it? No, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? That's carried. There are no matters of urgency. There are no questions on notice. Are there any questions without notice? Councillor Hales and then Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I have two questions without notice, if I may. The first of which is a progress report. What progress has been made towards the proposed study hub in Victoria?
Sorry, through the Mayor. Thank you for the question. So at this current stage, the completed business case is sitting with the Federal Government Department. We have seemed to experienced a delay. We're not sure as to why, because two study hubs were approved for the area of Mayo, one in Mount Barker, one in Victor Harbour. So the business for the South Coast is complete and has been submitted quite some time ago. Preferred location was in the centre of Victor Harbour, and we are still awaiting approval on that. We're aware that the delay was due to the federal government undertaking a review of all the study hubs currently in play, and we're seeing a fair bit of activity in regards to the need for skills development within regional areas. So we have sought a meeting with Rebecca Sharkey, who has then tried to make contact with the various departments, and through the RDA we are constantly seeking further updates, because we know with the federal election lingering, we don't want it to be delayed any further.
We have a meeting next week.
We have a meeting next week because we have actually been meeting with the other regions about a hub of hubs. So looking at trying to streamline the administration of the university centre, with having one administration for Mount Barker, South Coast and possibly Murray Bridge longer term. That was seen as a favourable model by the federal government. but we're still in those discussion phases.
Thank you very much, CEO. My second question is that can administration please provide a council meeting regarding any and all investigation studies and other reports that have been undertaken into the issues of pedestrian movements across Adelaide Road between the roundabout with Port Elliot Road through to McCracken Drive? And I'll bring these up in writing for Kyla.
Thank you. We may be able to bring something December. December meeting is on the 13th of December. We have a very small turnaround. So whether we will have the capacity or capability to bring that report back to the December meeting, it would no doubt be January, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Councillor Robertson, you had a question without notice?
Yes, Mayor, to the CEO. It's about the penguins, which monitoring ongoing at present. We have between 2 and 4 birds being counted each night. Is it possible for under this year's program with the CCTV cameras for us to install a relatively highly capable CCTV camera, probably in the vicinity of the horse-drawn tram barn, or a location down there where that will be focused on the entrance to the causeway, where we could put a 24/7 CCTV camera down there to record the numbers of people, which will be very useful for us in terms of visitor numbers and what people are doing, etc. It's kind of data we need for our tourist industry, but from the penguin point of view, the issues of whether there are dogs going over there, foxes, and so that we could be on this side of the island, we could, on our land, we could say that we are doing something really positive to, at relatively little cost, certainly labour costs, to towards the survival of the penguin colony.
Council, motion from
Through
Council.
the Mayor, obviously we would need to bring something back to the chamber. There is no operating budget for any CCTV cameras within that area of the Causeway precinct, and also married with that, it's actually around the utilisation, as you've suggested. There's no point collecting that data unless we're able to utilise it, and then what sort of resource or who's responsible for collating who saw what and counting people, etc. It's not saying it can't be done. Very happy to bring a report to council for council's consideration. They're the sorts of things we can raise with Dew when we meet with them on the 8th of December in regards to the role or responsibilities or partnership that we can have with Dew to assist them in managing the little penguin population on the island. But either way, it's something we'd need to come back to the chamber. We certainly don't have any provision in the budget this financial year.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on notice? Questions without notice? Councillor Littley.
I just wonder if I might add just a comment about knowing that you're looking ahead to Dew. SA Water, with the reservoir reserves being open to public access, they've got some exceptional CCTV capabilities and recording capabilities through that, identifying what types of objects are going in. So that program is, and it's obviously an extension of Department of Environment, so it might be worth pointed towards that kind of technology that they've developed specifically for that purpose.
Thank you, Councillor Littley, and I'm sure that's something that we can talk to Dew about at that meeting and find out a little bit more about it and the costs as well. Are there any further questions without notice? Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. To the CEO, can you confirm any of new land acquisitions that council's picked up in the last few months? Whereabouts and any costs associated to it?
New land that we've picked up. We are still in negotiations with Lot 101, which is the state government land at the back of the old TAFE building. So we still haven't signed the contract. That's a piece of land that we also received half of it. but we still haven't signed the contract, so we're still negotiating with DIT at the moment. Our biggest stumbling point has been the rezoning of that site. It's obviously our purchase was around community use, so we're just trying to make sure that it's zoned appropriately. And that's the only thing I think we've bought lately.
Are there any further questions without notice? There are no motions on notice. Are there any motions without notice? We now move on to financial items. And the first recommendation is to go into confidence because the information, the disclosure of which could be reasonably expected to confer a commercial advantage on a person with whom the council is proposing to conduct business or would prejudice the commercial position of council. And I'll take the rest of that recommendation that you have read. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Hales.
Mayor Jenkins, I'm going to declare my conflict of interest now. So I've got to declare a material conflict of interest in the entirety of this item as one of the proponents of the matter being discussed. I stand to gain a material benefit, so I will leave the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Hales. Would someone like to move the motion? Or should I wait for Councillor Hales to leave the building first? Leave the room. You don't have to leave the building. What did they say? Elvis has left the building. Would somebody like to move the motion to go into confidence? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Would either of you like to speak to that? Would anybody like to speak to that? I'll put the motion to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, gallery. Have a good night.